Imagine a boy so captivated by the world of code that he could see patterns where others saw chaos. A boy whose curiosity would one day shape the way the world thinks about intelligence, creativity, and the future itself. This is the story of Sam Altman, a visionary who transformed curiosity into a mission to guide humanity through the uncharted frontiers of artificial intelligence. In this journey, we will explore his early fascination with technology, the bold dreams that led him to create some of the most influential AI of our time, and the philosophical questions he continues to grapple with. Every step of his life reflects a balance between ambition and responsibility, innovation and ethics, curiosity and foresight. As we follow his story, I invite you to reflect on your own relationship with technology. How do you imagine intelligence shaping your life? And what responsibilities come with wielding such transformative power? Share your thoughts in the comments as we uncover the remarkable journey of the boy who spoke in code, the young visionary, and the leader who helped the world navigate the age of AI. Sam Altman's story begins quietly in a childhood shaped far more by curiosity than ambition. He grew up in St. Louis, a place where the air felt open, the days moved slowly, and people took time to notice little things, weather changes, neighborhood routines, the rhythm of ordinary life. In that environment, Sam learned early on how to sit with silence, how to explore gently, and how to follow his thoughts wherever they led. He wasn't loud, and he wasn't trying to stand out. He was simply a child with a mind that wandered into deeper places, studying the world the way some children study the sky or the patterns of leaves blown across a sidewalk. His quiet nature wasn't shyness, it was attentiveness, the beginning of a lifelong habit of observing before speaking. His parents nurtured this side of him in a way that never felt forced. They noticed that he enjoyed taking things apart and putting them back together, not to break them, but to understand them. They gave him space to explore these interests, allowing him to spend afternoons tinkering with small electronics or staring thoughtfully at a circuit board that didn't yet make sense to him. He learned early that understanding required patience, that clarity often came slowly, and that curiosity wasn't something to rush. These gentle lessons became part of him, shaping the calm, reflective person he would grow into. Everything changed the day he received his first computer. It wasn't modern by today's standards, but for him, it was a doorway into a universe he didn't know existed. The moment he turned it on, he felt an almost magnetic pull toward the glowing screen, the organized logic, and the sense of endless possibility. While other children saw computers as tools or toys, Sam saw something deeper, an invitation to explore an entirely different kind of world. He found comfort in the way a computer responded consistently, how it rewarded each small discovery, and how it held hidden layers waiting to be unlocked by anyone patient enough to look for them. In those early years, Sam spent hours learning how his computer worked. He wasn't trying to build anything specific. He was simply exploring, letting his curiosity guide him. Every program he opened was an experiment. Every piece of code he typed was a question. Every error message was a clue. He discovered that technology made sense to him in a way the physical world sometimes didn't. Machines were predictable, structured, and honest. They behaved according to rules that could be learned and understood. And for a child with a reflective mind, that kind of clarity was comforting. But Sam wasn't just drawn to the technical side of computing. He was also drawn to its emotional potential. He noticed how technology changed the way people communicated, how it connected them in ways that felt exciting and new. Even as a young teenager, he sensed that computers weren't just tools. They were extensions of human behavior, amplifiers of emotion, bridges between distant minds. This ability to blend technical understanding with human insight would later become one of his defining strengths. But even in childhood, the seeds were there, quietly growing. As he entered adolescence, Sam's sense of curiosity matured. He began to see the world not just as a collection of isolated systems, but as a network of ideas, behaviors, and invisible patterns. He could spend hours reflecting on why people made certain decisions, or how small changes in routine could ripple outward to shape larger outcomes. His introspective nature didn't isolate him from others. It simply meant he paid attention in a different way, noticing nuances most people overlooked. This growing awareness deepened his empathy and gave him the quiet confidence of someone who understood that listening was often more powerful than speaking. His early experiences with programming continued to shape him during this time. He learned not just how to write code, but how to troubleshoot, iterate, and persist. He discovered that progress didn't happen all at once. It happened through tiny steps, careful adjustments, and the willingness to sit with a problem until clarity eventually emerged. These lessons didn't stay on the computer screen. They seeped into his mindset, teaching him a long-form patience that would later serve him well in the unpredictable world of startups and leadership. By the time he reached Stanford, Sam carried with him not ambition, but a calm sense of direction. He wasn't motivated by prestige or competition. He was motivated by possibility, by the thought that technology, when shaped thoughtfully, could help people connect more deeply, think more clearly, and live more freely. Stanford offered him a new environment filled with people who also lived in the world of ideas, people who dreamed in broad strokes and wanted to build things that didn't exist yet. Instead of feeling overwhelmed, Sam felt at home. For the first time, he was surrounded by minds that moved at the same quiet, thoughtful pace as his own. He explored his classes, but he also explored something more important: the intersection of human behavior and digital systems. He became fascinated by how people communicated, how they coordinated, and how technology could gently reshape the flow of daily life. He noticed inefficiencies that others accepted, emotional patterns others ignored, and opportunities that others simply couldn't see. He didn't pursue these observations as business ideas. He pursued them as curiosities, reflections, questions that lingered and developed into insights. During this time, the early concept that would eventually lead him to entrepreneurship began forming quietly in the back of his mind. He wasn't chasing a startup. He wasn't even sure he wanted to build something. He was simply paying attention, observing how friends struggled to find time to meet up, how people missed opportunities to connect, and how communication often broke down in subtle but preventable ways. These small observations gradually combined into something more concrete, a sense that technology could help people locate and understand one another more intuitively. Looking back, it's clear that Sam's early years formed the foundation for everything that would come next. The patient curiosity of his childhood, the introspective depth of his teenage years, the thoughtful exploration of his early adulthood, each stage added a layer to the person he was becoming. He didn't rush toward a future he couldn't yet see. He simply followed the quiet pull of his interests, trusting that clarity would come in time. His journey began not with ambition, but with wonder, not with a plan, but with a question, not with intensity, but with calm exploration. And that gentle beginning would eventually carry him into a world of startups, leadership, and global responsibility. But the essence of who he was would remain unchanged, a quiet thinker, shaped by curiosity, guided by reflection, and grounded in the simple act of wanting to understand. As the idea that had been quietly forming in Sam's mind continued to grow, his days at Stanford began to feel different. It wasn't that he had lost interest in classes or campus life. It was that his curiosity was slowly pulling him in a new direction, a direction shaped not by academic schedules, but by the deeper questions that had followed him since childhood. He noticed himself thinking more about the invisible spaces between people, the missed moments, the unspoken thoughts, the subtle distance that existed even between close friends. These reflections didn't arrive with urgency. They arrived with a soft persistence, guiding him gently toward something he couldn't yet name. He spent long evenings walking across campus, letting his thoughts drift with the quiet rhythm of his footsteps. The warm glow from dorm windows, the laughter echoing across courtyards, the ambient noise of students moving between buildings. Everything around him blended into a calm backdrop that helped ideas settle into place. During these walks, he often returned to the same question: why did it feel so difficult for people to find one another, even when they wanted to? Human closeness seemed like something that should be simple, yet it was constantly disrupted by timing, uncertainty, and the fragmented nature of modern communication. The more he observed, the clearer this problem became. He saw friends trying to coordinate group dinners, only to give up after a dozen messages. He watched classmates pass each other on campus without realizing they were only steps apart. He listened as people talked about wanting to be more spontaneous, more connected, yet they struggled to find the right moment to reach out. These patterns fascinated him, not in a theoretical way, but in a human way. He didn't approach them like a business opportunity. He approached them like a puzzle of emotions and interactions, a social rhythm that technology hadn't yet learned how to support. Sam began quietly sketching out possible solutions. At first, the ideas were simple: tools that showed when friends were nearby, systems that allowed people to share availability with ease, features that reduced the friction of planning. But the more he thought, the more nuance he discovered. Sharing location wasn't binary. It was personal, contextual, emotional. People wanted closeness, but they also wanted control. They wanted spontaneity, but they also wanted privacy. Navigating that balance required more than engineering. It required understanding. He talked with his friends not like a founder pitching an idea, but like someone exploring a thought that needed shaping. He asked them what made connection hard, what made coordination stressful, and what made them hesitate to reach out even when they wanted to. These conversations were gentle, honest, and filled with real stories. Stories about missed opportunities, about wanting to be included, about wishing the world made it easier to simply be near the people who mattered. Each conversation added depth to Sam's thinking, helping him see the emotional landscape that surrounded his idea. Gradually, he began to feel something shift internally. The idea was no longer just a question he was exploring. It was beginning to feel like a direction, a quiet pull toward creation. He didn't feel excitement so much as clarity, a soft certainty that this was something worth building, something worth investing his time and mind into. He had always followed his curiosity, and now that curiosity was becoming a compass. As these thoughts deepened, Sam started spending more time experimenting with code again. He built small prototypes, simple visualizations, tools that mapped out how people might share their location in safe, meaningful ways. He didn't expect these early sketches to be perfect. They were just experiments, stepping stones that helped him understand what felt intuitive and what didn't. Some nights he'd work for hours without realizing how much time had passed, absorbed in the puzzle-like nature of turning an abstract idea into something real. At the same time, he wrestled with a growing realization. His most meaningful learning was happening outside the structure of the classroom. Stanford gave him access to brilliant minds, inspiring conversations, and a sense of possibility he cherished deeply. But the formal path, assignments, exams, rigid course sequences, felt increasingly distant from the type of exploration he was drawn to. He didn't dislike academia. He simply felt pulled toward a different kind of learning, one that unfolded through building, observing, and reflecting. He carried this tension quietly. He wasn't impulsive. He didn't rush decisions. Instead, he allowed the thought to settle and mature, the way he allowed ideas to grow in his mind before acting on them. He asked himself what he wanted to spend his days doing. He asked where he felt the most alive, the most engaged, the most aligned with his natural way of thinking. And the answer was clear. He wanted to build something meaningful, something rooted in empathy and insight, something that helped people feel more connected in their daily lives. When he finally felt ready to make a decision, it came not with drama, but with calm clarity. He chose to step away from Stanford, not as an escape from academia, but as a step toward a path that had been forming quietly for months. He knew some people would question the choice, but he trusted his instincts. He knew that growth often required stepping into uncertainty, and he felt prepared for that uncertainty in a way he hadn't been before. With this newfound willingness to create, Sam began reaching out to friends who shared his curiosity. He didn't seek people with specific skills. He sought people with the right mindset, people who were thoughtful, curious, and open to exploring ideas without needing guarantees. The small team that formed around him didn't gather under a grand vision or lofty promises. They gathered because they believed in exploring something meaningful together. They believed in understanding why connection was difficult, and in finding a gentle, elegant way to fix it. Their early work sessions were unstructured, but deeply productive. They sat around tables in small apartments and campus rooms, surrounded by notebooks, laptops, and the soft hum of brainstorming. Ideas flowed easily because there was no pressure to be perfect. They debated privacy with the seriousness it deserved. They tested early designs, laughed at their mistakes, and refined their thinking through countless iterations. Each meeting felt less like a business discussion and more like a collaboration among people who genuinely cared about the problem they were solving. During this time, Sam's understanding of leadership blossomed in ways he didn't expect. He realized that guiding a team wasn't about authority, it was about presence. It was about asking the right questions, listening fully, and creating an environment where everyone felt comfortable expressing ideas that weren't fully formed yet. He discovered that the emotional tone of a team mattered just as much as the technical decisions. If people felt supported, they would think more clearly, take smarter risks, and work with a sense of purpose that couldn't be forced. As prototypes evolved, the idea took on a more defined shape. A way for people to see who among their friends was nearby, available, and open to connecting. Not to track, not to monitor, but to enable spontaneous human moments that would otherwise be missed. The idea didn't feel like an app. It felt like a small enhancement to everyday life, something designed to blend quietly into the background rather than demand attention. Sam recognized the significance of this. He wasn't building something loud or addictive. He was building something gentle, technology designed to create connection without taking from people's peace. That intention became one of the guiding principles of the project. Soon, the work reached a stage where outside support would be necessary. Infrastructure, funding, and mentorship would help transform their thoughtful experiments into something durable. And that realization led Sam to consider applying to Y Combinator, a place known not just for helping founders grow companies, but for helping them grow in clarity, discipline, and direction. The decision to apply came naturally. It felt like an extension of the same quiet curiosity that guided every step of the journey. When Sam prepared the application, he didn't try to make the idea sound grandiose. He simply explained the problem, the solution, and the gentle purpose behind it. He trusted that sincerity mattered more than spectacle. When the acceptance finally arrived, Sam didn't feel a jolt of surprise. He felt alignment, an internal confirmation that this path was unfolding the way it needed to. The idea that once lived only in private reflections was now stepping into a larger world. And with that step, Sam entered a new phase of his life. A phase defined not by ambition, but by purpose, not by certainty, but by clarity, not by noise, but by the quiet confidence that he was building something that mattered. When Sam stepped into the early days of building his first real company, the world around him seemed to shift into a slower, more intentional rhythm. He was no longer just a student exploring ideas in quiet hallways and late-night campus paths. He was now entering a space where thoughts had to take form, where experiments became prototypes, and where curiosity had to evolve into something more concrete. Yet he didn't feel overwhelmed by this transition. Instead, he felt a quiet familiarity, as if everything he'd done up to this point had been quietly preparing him for the work ahead. The team he gathered around him was small, but it carried a warmth and authenticity that made early collaboration feel effortless. They weren't a corporate group with rigid roles or titles. They were simply thoughtful people drawn together by a shared desire to understand a problem. Their early meetings weren't strategic briefings. They were honest conversations, exploring what it meant for people to feel close, what it meant for technology to support everyday human life, and what it meant to build something that respected both privacy and connection. The room often filled with laughter, occasional frustration, and long pauses of contemplation as each person tried to figure out how to bring something intangible into reality. Their workspace, if it could even be called that, was a simple apartment living room, crowded coffee cups on the table, tangled cords on the floor, laptops glowing at all hours, and scribbled notes taped to the walls. It was messy, but it felt alive. They didn't need fancy furniture or a structured environment to be productive. What they needed was clarity of purpose, and that clarity grew stronger each day as they refined their understanding of what they were building. Every piece of feedback from friends, every test they ran, every small breakthrough helped Sam see the idea more clearly. As the team discussed the possibilities, Sam found himself returning again and again to one guiding question: how can technology gently support the natural flow of human relationships? He didn't want to create a tool that demanded attention. He wanted something that quietly enhanced real-world interactions, something that encouraged people to be more present with one another, not less. The earliest prototypes reflected this philosophy. They were simple, restrained, and focused on small moments when someone might choose to meet up with a friend they hadn't seen in a while, or moments when loneliness could be eased by a spontaneous connection that wouldn't have happened otherwise. During this period, Sam spent a great deal of time thinking not only about the product, but about the role he wanted to play in building it. Leadership, he discovered, wasn't something that emerged from authority. It emerged from the way he listened. He paid close attention to his teammates, their ideas, their concerns, the ways their voices changed when they spoke about something meaningful. He learned to sense hesitation before it was spoken, enthusiasm before it was expressed. And slowly, a pattern formed. People opened up when they felt safe, when they felt truly heard. This realization shaped the way Sam approached every discussion, turning meetings into open dialogues rather than directives. The product began to evolve as a reflection of these conversations. In the early prototypes, information was shared transparently but gently, allowing users to control how visible they were and to whom. Sam understood that trust wasn't optional. It was the foundation. If people didn't feel safe sharing their location, they wouldn't use the product at all. So he and the team spent hours debating privacy settings, designing features that honored boundaries, and creating systems that ensured users felt respected, not observed. This wasn't just a technical challenge, it was an emotional one. At times, progress felt slow. The team would spend days fine-tuning a single interaction or debating the ethical implications of one feature. But Sam never rushed the process. He believed that worthwhile things took time to shape, and that depth mattered more than speed. He had no desire to chase trends or compete with flashy new apps. His focus remained steady, building something meaningful, something that felt like an extension of human intuition rather than an interruption. As the weeks passed, the energy around the project grew more focused. The team started seeing glimpses of what the app could become, moments when everything seemed to align effortlessly. A user interface adjustment would suddenly make the whole experience feel smoother. A privacy model they'd been testing would suddenly make sense. These small breakthroughs filled the room with quiet excitement, the kind that didn't require celebration because everyone simply felt it, a shared recognition that they were building something that mattered. In the midst of this creative momentum, Sam's understanding of himself also deepened. He realized that building a product wasn't just about problem-solving, it was about understanding people. Every decision required empathy. Every feature required a sense of emotional awareness, and every challenge required a calm, steady mind willing to think beyond the surface. Sam found that he naturally gravitated toward this approach. He wasn't easily flustered, and he didn't get swept up in the stress that often accompanies early-stage building. Instead, he carried a sense of inner stillness that grounded the team, offering reassurance even when uncertainty loomed. That stillness, he discovered, came from the same place his curiosity came from, a lifelong habit of pausing, breathing, and letting thoughts settle before choosing a direction. It wasn't something he had learned from business books or mentors. It was something that had grown inside him since childhood, shaped by years spent exploring ideas slowly, following questions at his own pace, and finding clarity in quiet reflection. As their prototype grew more stable, Sam began sharing it more broadly within the Stanford community. The response was immediate and affirming. People liked the simplicity, the warmth, and the sense of effortless connection it offered. They didn't talk about it like a tool. They talked about it like a friend, something that helped them feel closer to the people who mattered. Users shared stories about meeting up with someone they hadn't seen in months, about unexpected reunions, about small moments of joy made possible by a notification that arrived at just the right time. Hearing these stories made Sam feel something he hadn't expected, a sense of emotional responsibility. This responsibility grew as the team realized they would soon need to take the next step, formalizing their work into a company and bringing it into the world beyond Stanford. The thought felt heavy at times, not because Sam doubted the idea, but because he understood how deeply technology could influence people's lives. He wanted to proceed with care. He wanted to build something he could stand behind ethically, emotionally, and intellectually. Applying to Y Combinator became the natural next step, not because they sought validation, but because they needed guidance. They needed mentorship from people who had navigated the unpredictable path from idea to reality. And Sam sensed that YC could give them the support, structure, and resources they needed to grow without losing their thoughtful approach. The application process felt strangely personal. Sam felt as though he was sharing not a business pitch, but a piece of his perspective, a quiet belief that technology could help people live more connected, meaningful lives without overwhelming them. He wrote with clarity and sincerity, choosing to express the heart of the idea rather than embellishing it with exaggerated claims. When the acceptance came, Sam felt no surge of adrenaline, no celebratory shouting. What he felt was alignment, a quiet assurance that the path unfolding in front of him was the right one. It wasn't about success. It wasn't about recognition. It was about support, a chance to refine the idea with the help of people who understood how to nurture early-stage projects without distorting them. Entering YC marked the beginning of a new reality for Sam and his team. Their days were now filled with deeper problem-solving, more focused brainstorming, and the steady pressure of bringing a real product into the world. But throughout this transition, Sam remained grounded. He continued approaching each challenge with patience, each conversation with empathy, and each decision with thoughtful care. He didn't know where this journey would ultimately lead, but he knew how to move forward with calm purpose, quiet determination, and the belief that the most meaningful creations begin not with ambition, but with a sincere desire to understand. As the reality of building a real product settled in, Sam found himself entering a stretch of life where each day felt like a lesson, sometimes gentle, sometimes demanding, but always meaningful. The transition from early experimentation to actual deployment was not marked by celebration or ceremony. It unfolded quietly through evenings spent refining code, mornings spent reviewing user feedback, and countless long conversations that shaped the direction of the product. The idea was beginning to take its first steps into the world. And with those steps came a new layer of responsibility that Sam felt deeply. Their team had now moved into a slightly larger workspace, still modest, still filled with clutter, but with a growing sense of purpose that made even the mess feel intentional. White boards stretched across the walls, covered in diagrams that only the team fully understood. Ideas were written, erased, rewritten, circled, crossed out, and written again. Laptops remained open at nearly every hour, glowing with the soft light of ongoing work. For many people, this kind of environment might have felt chaotic, but to Sam, it felt familiar. It felt like an extension of the quiet curiosity he had carried since childhood, now shared with a group of people who believed in the mission as much as he did. One of the most challenging parts of this phase was understanding how people actually used the product in their daily lives. The team discovered that real-world usage often diverged from their initial assumptions. Some people used the app to coordinate spontaneous meetups. Others used it as a gentle anchor in moments of loneliness, opening it not to track friends, but to feel connected in an intangible, emotional way. Still others used it sparingly, opening it only when they needed reassurance that they weren't too far from the people they cared about. Each pattern revealed something delicate about the human experience, about how proximity and emotion were intertwined. Sam approached this discovery process with the same thoughtful patience that defined his leadership. Instead of jumping to conclusions, he observed. He listened. He took notes not just on what users said, but on how they said it, the tones of their voices, the hesitations between sentences, the sighs of relief when something worked well, the slight frustration when something didn't. These soft human details mattered to him. They shaped his understanding more than graphs or metrics ever could. For Sam, the numbers revealed behavior, but the stories revealed meaning. Privacy soon became the centerpiece of their discussions, not because users complained loudly, but because Sam could sense the underlying tension, an emotional line that separated comfort from discomfort, trust from unease. Location data, he understood, was intimate. It carried with it an unspoken vulnerability. Even if users wanted to connect with their friends, they didn't want to feel exposed. So the team spent weeks refining how location was shared, building controls that allowed people to adjust visibility with ease, and designing features that ensured location information felt supportive, not invasive. Sam took great care in this work. He knew that earning trust once was difficult, and earning it back was nearly impossible. Instead of chasing growth at any cost, he prioritized safety and emotional comfort. He believed that connection should never come at the price of peace. This mindset became the heartbeat of the product, guiding every design choice and every conversation about what to build next. At the same time, the team faced technical challenges that tested their resilience. Servers struggled under unpredictable loads. Edge cases emerged where the app behaved differently than expected. Features that seemed simple in theory became complex in practice. There were nights when the team stayed awake until sunrise, working together in hushed tones, fueled by a mix of determination and caffeine. But even in these moments, Sam maintained a sense of calm that grounded everyone in the room. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't express frustration. He simply asked what needed to happen next, guiding the team through problems with a steady sense of clarity. Outside their workspace, attention began to grow. Journalists reached out, curious about the emerging world of location-based apps. Investors expressed interest, and users shared stories on social media about how the product helped them feel more connected. This attention brought new pressure to scale, pressure to grow faster, pressure to compete. But Sam remained intentionally slow. He refused to let external voices rush decisions or distort the thoughtful approach the team had maintained. Through all of this, Sam learned something important, that leadership wasn't just about guiding a team. It was about absorbing pressure in a way that allowed others to stay focused and creative. He made decisions thoughtfully, often after long stretches of quiet reflection. He didn't react impulsively or chase trends. Instead, he tried to understand every situation deeply before choosing a direction. This patience wasn't always easy in a world that rewarded speed, but it allowed the team to build with intention, ensuring that each new feature aligned with the values they cared about. As usage increased, unexpected issues surfaced, moments when the app brought people together in ways they loved, and moments when it created awkwardness or confusion. Each experience taught Sam something new about human behavior. He learned that people didn't always want to be seen, even by friends. He learned that connection was fluid, contextual, and deeply personal. He learned that technology had to adapt to people, not the other way around. These insights shaped his growing philosophy about product design, that good technology respected boundaries, empowered individuals, and blended into life without demanding constant attention. While the product gained popularity, competitors also emerged. Some launched features similar to the team's ideas. Others moved faster, added more bells and whistles, or marketed more aggressively. But Sam never seemed bothered by this. He saw competition as a sign that the problem they were solving was real, not as a threat. He believed that the true measure of their work wasn't in market share or press coverage. It was in whether they were building something genuinely helpful, something that truly improved people's daily experiences. Late at night, when the office was quiet and the world outside felt still, Sam often stayed behind to reflect. He wasn't planning strategy in these moments. He wasn't thinking about investors or metrics. He was thinking about people, the users who opened the app during a moment of loneliness, the friends who reconnected unexpectedly, the subtle warmth that came from knowing someone you cared about was nearby. These reflections gave him a sense of purpose that numbers could never replicate. As the product matured, Sam's understanding of leadership matured with it. He realized that guiding a company wasn't about control. It was about creating an environment where people could do their best work. It was about offering clarity when confusion arose, stability when challenges surfaced, and encouragement when progress felt slow. He made a habit of checking in with his teammates, asking about their well-being, sensing when someone needed support, and offering words that kept the team steady. Leadership, he discovered, was not a role but a responsibility, a quiet one, carried in moments others rarely noticed. Over time, the team grew more confident, more coordinated, more aware of their strengths. They had weathered early challenges, learned from users, and built a product that resonated with people in ways they hadn't fully anticipated. And through it all, Sam remained the same steady presence, curious, calm, patient, and deeply committed to understanding the emotional dimensions of the work. Eventually, this stage of his journey began to blend into something larger. The product was still evolving, still growing, but Sam could feel a new set of questions forming in the back of his mind, questions about the future of technology, the future of human connection, and the role he wanted to play in shaping the world beyond this first creation. He didn't know exactly where those questions would lead, but he understood something essential. Each step he had taken, every quiet moment of reflection, every gentle adjustment to the product, every thoughtful conversation, had prepared him to move toward something even greater. And with that awareness, his journey continued forward, carrying him deeper into the world of innovation and toward the next unfolding chapter of his life. As the work on his first company continued to evolve, Sam found himself entering a new stage of growth, one that unfolded less around the product itself and more around the person he was becoming. The early intensity of building, testing, and refining had given him a deeper understanding of how technology and emotion intertwined, but now the world around him began to change in ways he couldn't have anticipated. More people were noticing the small startup he and his friends had built. More conversations were happening in wider circles, and the idea that once lived only in dimly lit rooms was beginning to echo far beyond the team's immediate world. He approached this expansion with the same quiet steadiness that guided every part of his journey. While some founders might have been swept up in the attention, Sam remained grounded, still showing up each morning with curiosity rather than adrenaline. He continued listening to users, refining ideas, and thinking deeply about how small technological nudges could create meaningful shifts in how people related to one another. For him, growth wasn't measured by numbers or headlines. It was measured by the stories users shared, the subtle ways the product helped them navigate their days with a little more ease. Yet, as the company gained visibility, another layer of reality revealed itself: the complexity of leading something that no longer fit into the quiet spaces where it was born. Investors became more involved. Advisors offered differing opinions. People outside the team began projecting their own ideas onto the product, imagining everything it could become or everything they thought it needed to be. These voices weren't harmful, but they added a new texture to Sam's life, one that required discernment, patience, and a growing ability to navigate the external world with just as much calm as he navigated his internal one. Sam began to observe a new rhythm emerging in his days. Mornings were often filled with meetings, some energizing, some draining. Afternoons were spent debugging, designing, or addressing issues that surfaced unexpectedly. Evenings offered brief moments of calm before the next round of tasks emerged. Through it all, Sam discovered that leadership demanded a quiet endurance, a willingness to stay present, steady, and thoughtful even when the environment around him shifted rapidly. It wasn't a dramatic realization. It was a gradual one. Something felt more than declared. In the midst of this demanding flow, Sam started to notice something important. He found clarity not in intensity, but in moments of stillness. During late-night walks or early morning quiet, his mind worked through problems naturally, weaving together threads that appeared scattered just hours before. He began to rely on these reflective moments as essential parts of his process. They allowed him to maintain perspective, to resist the pressure of rushing decisions, and to ensure that each step he took aligned with the deeper purpose behind his work. As the product matured and the team grew more confident, the world around them began changing too. The mobile ecosystem was evolving quickly. Smartphones were becoming an increasingly central part of daily life, and new companies were emerging every month with bold ideas, ambitious plans, and aggressive strategies. The landscape was vibrant, competitive, and unpredictable. Many founders responded to this environment by pushing harder, moving faster, or stretching themselves thin. Sam, however, continued to move with intention. He believed that meaningful impact came from clarity, not speed. He watched the industry carefully, not in a strategic way, but in a thoughtful one. He paid attention to how companies interacted with users, how they communicated their values, and how they shaped the digital habits of millions. These observations fascinated him because he could sense an undercurrent, a subtle tension between technology as a tool for connection and technology as a source of noise. This awareness sparked deeper questions within him about the role technology should play in people's lives, questions that would continue to follow him long after this period. Sam also began to realize that the emotional experience of running a company was far different from the intellectual experience of creating one. There were days filled with optimism and pride, moments when the team's progress felt tangible and exciting. But there were also days filled with uncertainty, when challenges piled up, when technical issues multiplied, or when decisions carried emotional weight that couldn't be easily resolved. Through both, Sam maintained an inner calm that steadied not only himself, but everyone around him. That calm was not an act. It was part of who he was, someone who had always sought understanding instead of control. This steadiness became even more important as the company encountered the natural friction of growth. Some features didn't land the way the team expected. Some assumptions proved incomplete. Some paths that once looked promising revealed complications that required reevaluation. Instead of rushing to fix things, Sam approached each situation with patience, asking what the issue revealed about human behavior and how the product could adapt more gracefully. He saw challenges not as obstacles but as messages, signals pointing toward deeper clarity. During this stretch, Sam developed a new relationship with responsibility. It was no longer just about building a product. It was about supporting a team, protecting users, and navigating a rapidly shifting industry with integrity. He became more intentional in every decision he made. If a feature didn't feel ethically aligned, he didn't build it. If a suggestion from an advisor felt disconnected from the emotional core of the product, he didn't adopt it. He learned that the most important decisions weren't the ones that drew attention. They were the ones that ensured the product remained true to its purpose. As his responsibilities grew, so did his understanding of the emotional dynamics of leadership. He realized that people often looked to him not for answers, but for reassurance. They wanted to know that things would be okay, that uncertainty didn't mean failure, and that progress was still being made even on days when everything felt difficult. Sam embraced this role naturally. He wasn't trying to perform confidence. He simply understood that stability was a kind of guidance in itself. During one quiet evening after the office had emptied and the glow of computer screens had faded, Sam sat alone reflecting on how far they had come. The room was still, filled only with the faint buzz of electronics and the hum of a nearby streetlight outside the window. He felt a mixture of gratitude and resolve. Gratitude for the team, for the users, for the journey, resolve for everything that still lay ahead. He didn't know what the future would bring, but he felt a sense of direction, a sense that he was moving toward something larger than anything he had imagined when he first started playing with ideas in a dorm room. This quiet moment made him realize something else, that growth was not just happening externally in the company, it was happening within him. He was learning how to make decisions that balanced empathy with logic. He was learning how to navigate complexity without losing his internal calm. He was learning how to lead with intention, not obligation. These weren't skills he sought out. They were lessons that unfolded through experience, each one deepening his understanding of who he was becoming. As weeks turned into months and months slowly edged toward something that resembled the next phase of the company's journey, Sam felt a growing awareness that this period, this stretch of quiet building, learning, and evolving, was laying the foundation for everything that would come later. He didn't know exactly what shape his future would take, but he sensed that the curiosity guiding him was leading him toward new horizons. There were larger questions he had begun to think about, questions about intelligence, society, and the deeper role technology might play in shaping the future of humanity. These questions didn't arrive with urgency. They arrived the way most important thoughts arrived for Sam, gently, quietly, like a slow-moving tide that gradually revealed the landscape beneath it. And as this new curiosity began to form inside him, he felt the first subtle shift toward the next part of his journey, a shift that would eventually take him far beyond the world of location-sharing apps and into a realm of ideas that would change both his life and the world itself. As the company continued to grow and settle into its identity, Sam found himself navigating a period where the outside world began to see him differently, even if he didn't quite feel different inside. To many, he was becoming a rising figure in the tech landscape, someone whose ideas carried weight, whose calm presence drew attention, and whose product represented a fresh approach to connection in an increasingly digital age. But to Sam, the work still felt intimate, personal, and grounded in the same curiosity that had guided him since childhood. He wasn't trying to build a reputation. He was trying to understand what people needed and how technology could meet those needs without overwhelming them. More investors reached out, more journalists wanted interviews, and more people wanted to hear Sam's perspective on the future of mobile technology. He approached each conversation thoughtfully, not as opportunities for promotion, but as chances to articulate ideas that had been forming quietly over the years. He didn't speak with grandiosity or sweeping predictions. He spoke with clarity about connection, about emotional design, about building with intention rather than speed. People often remarked on his ability to explain complex ideas in simple, grounded ways. But for Sam, simplicity wasn't a performance. It was the natural result of thinking deeply. Even as public attention grew, Sam never lost sight of what was happening within the company itself. He spent his days working closely with his team, addressing issues that surfaced, reviewing new features, and exploring where the product could evolve next. He discovered that leadership required being present in two worlds at once: the external world that demanded explanation, and the internal world that demanded understanding. Balancing these two spaces wasn't always easy, but Sam learned to navigate them with the same patience and attentiveness he brought to everything else. During this time, he also became more aware of the emotional reality of building something that other people depended on. Users weren't just numbers on a dashboard. They were individuals whose daily lives were quietly shaped by the decisions he and his team made. A slight change in design could affect how someone coordinated with their friend. A miscommunication in a feature could affect someone's comfort or trust. Sam carried these responsibilities gently, not as burdens, but as reminders that technology held real power, even when it operated silently in the background. This sense of responsibility grew stronger when the company began scaling beyond its small, intimate roots. New employees joined the team, bringing fresh perspectives, new questions, and different styles of thinking. Sam welcomed each new voice, seeing diversity not as complexity to manage, but as a source of insight. He noticed how new members challenged assumptions, questioned old decisions, and helped refine ideas with fresh eyes. Instead of resisting this, Sam embraced it. He believed that good ideas grew stronger when exposed to thoughtful challenge. As the team expanded, he also encountered the softer challenges of leadership, the ones that weren't about product direction or technical complexity, but about people feeling overwhelmed, discouraged, or unsure of their place. Sam learned how to read those feelings in subtle ways, in the tone of someone's voice, in the way they hesitated during discussions, in the quiet moments when someone lingered at their desk long after others had left. He made time for conversation, not to give orders or solutions, but simply to listen. Often that was enough. People didn't always need answers. Sometimes they just needed to feel seen. While Sam was growing more attuned to the emotional dimensions of leadership, the world outside continued shifting rapidly. Smartphones were becoming more powerful. Mobile apps were no longer novelties. They were woven into the fabric of daily life. New companies emerged and disappeared in waves. The landscape was vibrant and unpredictable, filled with both opportunity and pressure. But even as competition intensified, Sam's approach remained steady. He didn't rush to add features just because competitors did. He didn't chase attention for the sake of visibility. He remained committed to building slowly, carefully, and intentionally. Through this period, Sam began spending more time contemplating the broader implications of what he was building. He thought about how the product influenced relationships, how it shaped small decisions, and how it affected the emotional climate of people's lives. These reflections often occurred late at night, after the office had emptied and the world had quieted. He would sit by a window or walk alone through dimly lit streets, letting his thoughts unfold naturally. It was during these quiet moments that he began sensing the early formation of larger questions inside him. Questions about the future of technology, about the nature of intelligence, and about what role he personally wanted to play in shaping the decades ahead. These questions didn't distract him from his current work. Instead, they deepened his relationship with it. They helped him see the company not as an endpoint, but as a foundational experience, something that was teaching him how to understand people, how to build responsibly, and how to think deeply about the intersection of technology and humanity. Without realizing it, he was developing the philosophical framework that would eventually guide some of the most important decisions of his life. At the same time, the emotional weight of running a startup grew heavier. There were days when progress was slow, when technical issues piled up, or when decisions felt complicated and uncertain. On those days, Sam leaned on the inner stillness he had cultivated over the years. The same stillness that allowed him to think clearly as a child experimenting with computers, the same stillness that helped him reflect during long walks at Stanford. He learned that clarity often emerged only after sitting with confusion, that solutions came after the noise settled, not before. Despite the stress and unpredictability, there were moments of joy woven into the work, moments when the team celebrated small victories, moments when users wrote messages that warmed the heart, moments when the product worked exactly the way it was meant to. These moments weren't loud or dramatic. They were soft, but they mattered deeply. They reminded everyone why they were building, why they were trying, and why the effort felt worthwhile. Over time, Sam noticed something shifting inside him. The startup was still important, but the questions drawing him forward were beginning to expand. He found himself thinking about intelligence not just as a technical concept, but as a force that could reshape the world in profound ways. He thought about how technology had the power to amplify human capability and how the next wave of innovation would require even deeper ethical grounding and emotional awareness. These thoughts were subtle at first, forming quietly in the background of his mind, but as they grew stronger, he felt a sense that the path ahead would eventually lead him to explore something bigger, something that would demand even more from him than the company he had built so far. He didn't rush that realization. He didn't try to define it prematurely. He simply let it exist, unfolding naturally over time. His curiosity had always been patient, and this was no different. He knew that clarity would come when it was meant to, and until then, the responsibility he carried was to remain present, thoughtful, and open to wherever his path would lead next. And as this deeper curiosity settled into his consciousness, something inside him shifted, not suddenly, not dramatically, but with the gentle certainty that comes when someone senses the beginning of a new horizon. He didn't yet know what that horizon would hold, only that he would meet it the same way he had met every challenge so far, with calm, with curiosity, and with a steady desire to understand. As Sam moved deeper into the rhythms of startup life, he began to sense something shifting quietly beneath the surface of his work. The company continued to grow, users continued to share meaningful stories, and the team continued refining the product with care. But there was a new undercurrent forming within him, something subtle, something introspective, something that didn't yet have a clear definition. It was as if the experience of building his first company was illuminating a broader landscape, one he hadn't fully noticed before. And with each passing month, that landscape grew a little clearer. The more the product developed, the more Sam found himself thinking beyond the immediate problems in front of him. He began reflecting on the nature of technology itself, how it shaped human behavior, how it reshaped expectations, and how it influenced the emotional texture of daily life. He wondered why some tools felt empowering, while others felt draining, why some technologies brought people closer, while others quietly pulled them apart. These weren't questions about features or metrics. They were questions about humanity, and they demanded the kind of deep, patient thought Sam naturally gravitated toward. He started noticing how people interacted with technology in ways that revealed their deeper feelings. A user who opened the app late at night wasn't looking for efficiency. They were looking for comfort. Someone checking location before reaching out wasn't looking for information. They were seeking reassurance. These moments showed Sam that technology wasn't just a utility. It was becoming an emotional medium, something people turned to in moments of uncertainty, loneliness, or hope. This realization planted a seed in his mind, one that grew stronger each time he observed the world through this lens. Even in the busiest periods of work, Sam made time for the quiet moments that helped him think. He would walk through the city at night, the streets mostly empty, except for the occasional passing car or the soft glow of storefronts closing for the evening. In those quiet walks, he found the space to reflect on the larger implications of his work. He thought about how the world was changing faster than people realized, how technology was beginning to operate as an extension of thought, amplifying ideas, enabling connection, and shaping the rhythm of everyday life in ways that few fully understood. These reflections didn't pull him away from the company. They made him more thoughtful about the direction he wanted to guide it. He became more attuned to the ethical nuances of what he was building, not because of public pressure, but because he felt personally responsible for honoring the trust users placed in his work. He encouraged the team to focus on respect, on designing with restraint, on ensuring that the product remained gentle and supportive. He didn't want to create habits based on compulsion. He wanted to create interactions rooted in clarity and genuine value. This mindset shaped the culture within the company in ways that surprised even Sam. Team members began naturally adopting his thoughtful approach, taking time to consider how their decisions might affect users emotionally. Brainstorming sessions evolved into discussions about empathy, consent, and context. Rather than asking, "What can we build next?" the team found themselves asking, "What should we build next?" It was a small shift in language, but a profound shift in philosophy. At this stage, the company began to receive more attention from investors and potential partners. Many saw the rising influence of mobile technology and wanted to align themselves with promising startups. Meetings were frequent, and the suggestions were often bold: expand rapidly, grow aggressively, take risks to capture more of the market. But Sam didn't feel compelled by these strategies. He listened patiently, taking each point seriously, but he made decisions based on alignment, not excitement. He wanted growth, but not at the cost of intention. Despite the increasing demands on his time, Sam continued to carve out space for his habitual private reflections. Even when days were packed with meetings, planning sessions, and user discussions, he made sure to find a quiet corner at some point, sometimes in a coffee shop, sometimes in the office, after everyone had left, sometimes in his apartment, with only the soft hum of electronics for company. These were the moments in which clarity formed. They allowed him to think slowly, to process the emotional weight of leadership, and to understand the direction his intuition was pulling him toward. It was during these reflective moments that Sam began sensing the limits of what his current company could explore. He saw the value in the product they had built, the lives it had touched, and the experiences it had enriched, but he also saw its boundaries. It addressed one piece of a much larger puzzle: connection, presence, the emotional signal of proximity. But there were deeper questions he felt compelled to explore, questions about intelligence, learning, and the nature of human capability. These questions grew louder in his mind, not because he was dissatisfied with what he had built, but because his curiosity was expanding. At the same time, the company itself was entering a more stable phase, one defined less by experimentation and more by refinement. The initial chaos of startup life had softened into a sustainable rhythm, with team members stepping confidently into their roles and new hires carrying the momentum forward. Sam still played a central role, but the nature of his work was changing. He spent less time writing code and more time thinking about architecture, more time guiding strategy, and less time troubleshooting. It wasn't a loss. It was a shift, a natural evolution that comes when something grows from a project into an organization. Yet this shift left Sam with more space in his mind, space that his curiosity quickly filled with new ideas. When he spoke with friends, he found himself bringing up broader topics: how intelligence shapes society, how knowledge could be shared globally, how technology might eventually learn rather than simply respond. These conversations weren't anchored to immediate goals. They were speculative, exploratory, reflective. They revealed something inside him that had been quietly forming for years, a desire to understand the nature of intelligence itself. This desire emerged partly from watching how people interacted with technology. He noticed how users adapted to tools and how tools adapted to users. He noticed how technology shaped decision-making, how it amplified effort, and how it revealed patterns people couldn't see alone. These observations made him wonder what would happen if technology didn't just reflect intelligence, but expanded it. What would happen if machines could help people think more clearly, learn more deeply, and solve problems that were once beyond reach? These weren't questions that his current product could address. They were too large, too abstract, too connected to the future rather than the present. But they lingered in his mind with increasing clarity. He realized that the world was on the edge of a transformation, not just in how people communicated, but in how people thought. And he felt drawn to explore that frontier, not because of ambition, but because his mind naturally gravitated toward the edges of possibility. Still, he didn't move impulsively. He didn't chase the next idea with hurried excitement. He continued nurturing the company, guiding his team, and supporting the product's growth with the same steady leadership that had carried him this far. But beneath the surface, a slow, gentle shift was taking place. A shift that brought with it new questions, new reflections, and a quiet certainty that a different kind of work was calling to him. As this awareness deepened, Sam began sensing that a deeper journey awaited him, one that would require all the reflection, patience, and clarity he had cultivated throughout his life. A journey that would eventually lead him toward the frontier of artificial intelligence. A journey that would change not only his life, but the trajectory of technology itself. As time passed, Sam found himself standing at an intersection between what he had built and what he was beginning to imagine. The company continued running smoothly, supported by a capable team that had grown into its responsibilities with confidence and care. They had reached a stage where the product no longer felt fragile. The road ahead, at least for this chapter of his life, appeared stable and predictable. Yet even with that stability, Sam felt a quiet restlessness forming, a sense that his curiosity was starting to wander toward new horizons. He didn't feel unfulfilled. In many ways, he felt grateful for everything the journey had given him: the lessons in leadership, the deepening understanding of people, the experiences that shaped his perspective. But underneath that gratitude was a subtle pull, a gentle insistence that there was something larger waiting to be explored. It wasn't ambition. It wasn't dissatisfaction. It was simply curiosity. The same force that had guided him since childhood, now calling him toward questions he couldn't ignore. The world around him was beginning to change as well. Conversations about artificial intelligence were becoming more frequent, though often filled with misconceptions or abstract speculation. Sam noticed how people spoke about it with a mixture of fascination and uncertainty. Some saw potential, others feared disruption, but most didn't fully understand the magnitude of what was quietly emerging. Sam didn't claim to understand it deeply either, not yet. But he sensed something profound beginning to take shape, something that felt less like an incremental improvement to technology and more like a fundamental shift in the way humanity might think, learn, and grow. He found himself drawn to discussions about intelligence, not just artificial, but human intelligence as well. He wondered why some people learned faster than others, why creativity flourished in certain environments, but withered in others, and what might happen if technology could help amplify the best parts of human thought. These weren't questions tied to any specific product or company. They were questions tied to the nature of progress itself. And the more he reflected on them, the more they seemed to connect to everything he had already learned about building, empathy, and the emotional dimension of technology. During evenings when the office was quiet and the city outside had settled into its nighttime rhythm, Sam would sometimes sit at his desk long after everyone else had left. The dim light from his monitor illuminated the room as he scrolled through papers, articles, and essays on machine learning. He wasn't studying them for work. He was studying them out of a growing sense of wonder. He saw glimpses of a future in which computers could do more than follow instructions. They could assist in thinking, help unlock scientific discoveries, and support human potential in ways few had yet imagined. Every now and then, he would pause, lean back in his chair, and simply let the possibilities swirl through his mind. He sensed that the next frontier of technology wouldn't be about helping people connect to one another. It would be about helping people connect to knowledge, insight, and capability on a scale that humanity had never experienced before. Meanwhile, the company continued to progress steadily. Users remained engaged, the team worked with confidence, and the product maintained its place in people's daily routines. But as operations grew more structured, Sam felt himself drifting gently away from the daily rhythm. He no longer needed to make every decision, solve every technical problem, or review every design. The team was capable. They were thoughtful. They could carry the torch forward. This realization left Sam with something he hadn't felt in years: mental space. And where there was space, curiosity naturally flowed in. He began reading more widely, books about cognition, essays about the mind, discussions about intelligence, both biological and artificial. He wasn't looking for answers. He was looking for understanding. He wanted to see the patterns that connected human thought with technological possibility. He wanted to understand not just what AI could do, but what it should do, not just how it might evolve, but how humanity might evolve alongside it. He noticed something else during this period. Whenever he thought about the future, his imagination didn't pull toward apps, devices, or consumer tools. It pulled toward ideas, big, foundational ideas about how intelligence could reshape society. He wondered what would happen if the world had access to systems that could reason, learn, and support people at a level far beyond what current tools allowed. He wondered how such systems could improve education, healthcare, science, and creativity. And he wondered how humanity could build them ethically, safely, and with a deep respect for human values. These reflections grew stronger with each passing month, creating a soft tension inside him. On one hand, he was deeply connected to the company he had built. On the other, he felt a pull toward something that didn't exist yet, something that demanded his full attention, something that aligned with his expanding curiosity in ways he couldn't ignore. He didn't talk about this tension often, not because he was hiding it, but because he knew it was still forming. He needed to understand it fully before he could articulate it to others. Instead, he let the feeling sit quietly within him, allowing it to grow naturally. As this internal shift continued, Sam began noticing how people around him viewed intelligence as static, something fixed, measured, or limited by circumstance. But he didn't see it that way. He saw intelligence as fluid, as something that could expand through environment, support, and opportunity. And he sensed that the next major advancement in technology would arise from that fluidity, from building systems that allowed people to think more clearly, explore more deeply, and solve problems that surpassed individual human capability. He realized that these ideas were too large to ignore and too important to treat casually. If the world truly was heading toward a future where machine intelligence played a central role, then it mattered deeply who guided that future and how. One evening, after a particularly long day, Sam left the office and walked home through quiet streets illuminated by soft streetlights. The air was cool, and the city felt unusually still. As he walked, he reflected on everything he had built and everything he hoped to explore. The decision he had been approaching for months finally crystallized, not as a burst of inspiration, but as a calm, clear understanding. He was ready to step toward something new, not because he wanted change, but because his curiosity demanded it. Not because he was leaving anything behind, but because he was following the path that had been forming inside him for years. Not because he had all the answers, but because he wanted to ask bigger questions. By the time he reached his apartment door, he felt a quiet certainty that the next part of his journey would be unlike anything that had come before. It would challenge him intellectually, ethically, emotionally. It would demand new kinds of reflection, new forms of responsibility, and deeper levels of understanding, and he was ready. Because everything he had built so far, every long night, every careful decision, every moment of listening and learning, had prepared him to explore the frontier that now called to him with increasing clarity, a frontier where intelligence, humanity, and possibility would converge in ways the world had only begun to imagine. When Sam finally stepped away from the company he had built, the world didn't erupt into noise or chaos. Instead, it became quieter, almost spacious. The momentum of startup life, with its constant movement and unending demands, gradually faded from his daily routine, replaced by something far more open and contemplative. For the first time in years, he found himself waking up without a rigid structure waiting for him. No backlog of meetings, no crisis that needed immediate attention, no product decision looming overhead, just space, wide, uncluttered mental space. Most people would have filled that space quickly, whether with new ventures or immediate commitments. But Sam didn't rush. He let his mind settle, the way one lets still water reveal its surface again after being stirred for too long. He took long walks through familiar streets, explored neighborhoods he had never paid attention to, and spent more hours than he expected in coffee shops with a notebook open in front of him, writing down thoughts that drifted in without invitation. At first, those thoughts were fragments, observations, questions, half-formed ideas that held a more feeling than structure. But slowly, a pattern began to emerge. He realized just how profoundly his experience building a company had changed him. The process had sharpened his awareness of human behavior, deepened his understanding of communication, and taught him the emotional weight that technology could carry. It had also revealed how limited certain tools were when it came to supporting human thought. He had seen firsthand how people relied on technology for connection, yet struggled with tools meant to help them think, learn, or understand. This contrast fascinated him. Why was technology so good at capturing attention, yet so poor at amplifying intelligence? Why was it so good at distraction, yet so limited in helping people see clearly? These questions were not abstract musings. They were deeply personal reflections, shaped by everything he had observed while building his first product. He had built something that helped people find each other physically. Now he wondered what could help people find clarity within themselves. Clarity in thinking, clarity in learning, clarity in understanding the world. In this quiet period of reflection, Sam began reading voraciously. Books about cognition, psychology, philosophy, economics, machine learning, and the history of scientific discoveries filled his time. Sometimes he read slowly, letting each idea settle. Other times he consumed material rapidly, driven by a restless desire to understand a subject from every angle. He wasn't trying to become an expert in anything specific. He was trying to build a mental map of how intelligence worked, not just mathematically, but humanly. He noticed how often breakthroughs in science came from unexpected connections, how the most transformative ideas were rarely isolated. They were intersections, places where one field touched another, creating new possibilities no one had considered before. This observation echoed something he had always believed, that the world's biggest problems weren't solved by specialization alone. They were solved by synthesis, by people willing to explore the space between disciplines, the space where curiosity and creativity met. One afternoon, while reading an essay about general intelligence, Sam paused and looked up from the page. It wasn't the content that struck him. It was the feeling the content produced. The essay described intelligence as an ability to understand, adapt, and generalize across contexts, and as he thought about that idea, he realized that intelligence, true intelligence, was the defining force that shaped civilizations. It determined how societies solved problems, how they built tools, how they survived crises, and how they evolved. Everything humanity had accomplished, every advancement across history, could be traced back to this one phenomenon. If intelligence was the root of progress, he wondered, then wouldn't enhancing intelligence safely, ethically, responsibly be the most important project of the century? The answer came quickly and quietly, yes. The more he sat with this realization, the more it compelled him. It felt like the natural continuation of everything he'd learned so far. His first company had taught him how to understand people. Now he wanted to understand what could help people reach farther than they ever had, not by replacing human intelligence, but by expanding it. In the following weeks, Sam met with researchers, thinkers, and technologists who were exploring the early edges of artificial intelligence. These weren't polished meetings. They were conversations held in living rooms, labs, small conference rooms, and quiet corners of campus buildings. Some researchers were cautious, others enthusiastic, and many were unsure how far the field could truly go. But all of them shared a sense that something extraordinary was beginning to take shape. Sam listened more than he spoke. He asked questions that weren't about performance metrics or benchmarks. He asked about implications, about ethics, about responsibility. He wanted to understand the emotional and societal dimensions of machine intelligence, not just the technical ones. He sensed that the future would require a balance between capability and caution, between innovation and humanity. During one conversation, a researcher described a model that could interpret text in increasingly sophisticated ways. The idea wasn't fully developed, but it hinted at a future where machines could help people reason through problems, translate ideas between fields, and refine thoughts in ways that felt collaborative rather than mechanical. Sam found the idea both thrilling and grounding. He imagined a world where anyone could access a thinking partner, something that didn't replace human creativity but enhanced it, something that made knowledge feel close, personal, and supportive. As these conversations accumulated in his mind, Sam started to see a new horizon forming. It wasn't a sudden revelation. It was a gradual illumination, like a dawn spreading across a landscape he had never seen clearly before. He realized that artificial intelligence wasn't just the next step in technology, it was the next step in human capability. And if built thoughtfully, it could elevate people in ways no tool had ever done. But he also understood the weight of this realization. Intelligence was powerful. It could unlock enormous good, but it could also amplify harm if built recklessly. The future would require people who understood the depth of this responsibility, people who could think beyond short-term incentives, who cared about ethics as much as innovation, and who were willing to build with the same gentle intention he had brought to his earlier work. One evening, after weeks of reflection, Sam walked to a small park near his apartment. The city lights flickered softly in the distance, and a faint breeze carried the scent of trees waking in the cool night air. He sat on a bench, notebook in hand, and wrote down a single sentence. What if intelligence could be shared? As soon as he wrote it, he felt a quiet certainty. This was the direction he had been moving toward, not because he planned it, but because his curiosity had led him here step by step. He had spent years learning how technology shapes people. Now he wanted to explore how technology could help shape the future of thought itself. By the time he stood up to leave the park, he knew that the next chapter of his life was beginning, not in the form of a new company yet, but in the form of purpose. A purpose rooted in understanding, in curiosity, and in the belief that the world was on the edge of something extraordinary. He didn't know exactly how he would contribute. He didn't know what the path would look like, but he knew that whatever he pursued from this moment forward would be guided by one central question. How can intelligence, human and artificial, help humanity reach its fullest potential? And with that question guiding him, his journey continued forward quietly, steadily, toward the world of artificial intelligence. As Sam continued exploring the emerging world of artificial intelligence, something inside him shifted from curiosity to conviction. The quiet reflection that first drew him toward questions about intelligence now grew into a deeper understanding that this field wasn't just interesting, it was foundational. And with each conversation, each article he read, each late-night thought that unfolded during long walks, his sense of direction became clearer. He didn't frame this new interest as a career pivot. He framed it as an exploration, one that wasn't driven by urgency or ambition, but by a steady desire to understand a force that would one day shape the entire world. And the more he learned, the more he realized how early everything still was. AI research, despite decades of progress, felt like it was still standing at the shoreline of a vast ocean. Most people could see the water, but very few understood how deep it went. This realization filled Sam with a strange combination of excitement and caution. He imagined the incredible possibilities that could come from building systems that could think, learn, and support human understanding. But he also sensed the magnitude of responsibility such systems would demand. Intelligence wasn't a toy, it wasn't a product. It was something fundamental, something capable of magnifying human intention, for better or worse. During this period, his days became a mix of conversations, reading, and quiet contemplation. He met with researchers whose work was far ahead of mainstream understanding. Some had been studying machine learning for decades. Others were just beginning to explore ideas that would later become milestones. They talked about neural networks, training data, model architecture, and emergent behavior. But beneath the technical details, Sam heard something deeper, a sense that humanity was approaching a new kind of frontier. One researcher described AI as a growing mirror, one that would reflect human thought, amplify it, and eventually reveal new forms of intelligence beyond what any individual could produce alone. Another spoke about the possibility of machines generating insights that humans could not reach unaided. Another warned about the ethical complexities that would arise from systems that didn't just follow instructions, but interpreted them. These moments stayed with Sam long after the conversations ended. He found himself replaying them during walks, scribbling notes about their implications, and wondering how society would adapt to a world where intelligence was no longer limited to biology. It wasn't long before he began receiving invitations to broader conversations, private gatherings where economists, scientists, technologists, and thinkers discussed long-term questions about the direction of innovation. In these rooms, Sam felt something he hadn't felt before: alignment. These weren't conversations about the next app or the next consumer trend. They were conversations about the next era of human progress. And yet, despite the weight of these discussions, The tone remained thoughtful, even gentle. People wrestled with questions rather than pushing for conclusions. They spoke about uncertainty with humility, acknowledging how much remained unknown. Sam found these environments deeply grounding. They reminded him that meaningful work wasn't loud. It was quiet, deliberate, and patient. Gradually, Sam began to imagine what it might look like to play a role in this emerging world, not as an engineer pushing the boundaries of model architecture, not as a researcher writing papers, but as someone who could help bring people together, someone who understood technology, leadership, ethics, and human behavior deeply enough to guide the direction of something as powerful as artificial intelligence. This idea didn't arrive fully formed. It emerged slowly, shaped by reflections, conversations, and the feeling that his experiences had been preparing him for something larger than he realized. His years leading a startup had taught him how to manage uncertainty, how to handle pressure, how to communicate with clarity, and how to design technology that honored human experience. Now those skills felt like pieces of a puzzle he had been unconsciously assembling. He remembered something a mentor once told him. Sometimes your path doesn't show itself until you've walked far enough to see it from above. Now he could finally see the shape of his path. Around this time, Sam began hearing whispers about a small group of researchers and technologists who wanted to create an organization focused on artificial intelligence, not for commercial purposes, but to understand it deeply and ensure it benefited humanity. The idea wasn't widely known, the group was small, the vision ambitious, and the goals long-term. But the more Sam learned, the more he felt drawn to it. Not because it promised success or recognition, but because it aligned perfectly with the questions that had been growing inside him for years. The idea of helping build something like that felt both exhilarating and daunting. It would mean stepping into a world filled with uncertainty, risk, and responsibility. But it also felt like a natural continuation of the journey he was already on, a journey defined not by chasing outcomes, but by following curiosity with integrity. As Sam's interest deepened, he slowly became more involved in discussions with this emerging group. These conversations didn't revolve around business models or product strategies. They revolved around safety, alignment, societal impact, and long-term responsibility. They explored how AI systems should behave, how they should be governed, and how humanity could guide their development with wisdom rather than haste. Sam found himself speaking less about technical details and more about principles that would ensure that AI amplified human potential instead of diminishing it, protected people instead of manipulating them, and elevated society rather than fragmenting it. These conversations resonated deeply with him. They touched on the emotional, philosophical, and ethical dimensions of technology that he had been thinking about quietly for years. As months passed, Sam found his days increasingly shaped by this new direction. He spent less time reflecting on his past company and more time thinking about the future of intelligence. He wasn't trying to force anything. The transition was happening naturally, guided by a sense of purpose rather than pressure. He began writing more essays and sharing his thoughts publicly. His posts weren't technical treatises. They were reflections, calm, thoughtful explorations of how technology should evolve, how society should adapt, and how leadership should approach responsibility. People responded to these writings not because they were dramatic, but because they were sincere. They offered clarity in a space often clouded by hype and fear. Through these essays, through conversations, through quiet reflection, Sam felt himself stepping gradually into a new role, not one defined by a job title, but by perspective. He was becoming someone who could bridge worlds, the world of technology and the world of human values, the world of research and the world of leadership, the world of possibility and the world of caution. As his involvement deepened, the group he connected with eventually took shape as a formal organization, one dedicated to understanding artificial intelligence and ensuring it benefited humanity. It was small at first, almost fragile, but it carried a vision that felt larger than any single contributor. And when Sam was invited to help guide it, he didn't respond with excitement or fear. He responded with stillness, a sense that this was the work he had been moving toward all along. He accepted not because he believed he had all the answers, but because he believed deeply in the importance of asking the right questions. And when he finally stepped into that world, he did so with the same calm, quiet curiosity that had guided him since childhood, ready to learn, ready to lead, and ready to explore the frontier that would reshape the future of intelligence. When Sam stepped into his new role with the quiet, emerging AI organization, the transition did not happen with fanfare or grand announcements. Instead, it unfolded gently through a series of conversations, informal meetings, and shared reflections with people who were beginning to see the same horizon he saw. The team was small, the resources limited, and the goals ambitious enough to unsettle even the most confident thinkers. Yet the atmosphere felt strangely calm, almost meditative. Everyone involved understood that they were working on something that required more than intellect. It required humility. Sam entered this environment with a sense of purpose he had never experienced before. His previous work had been about connection, understanding people, understanding their emotional patterns, understanding how technology could quietly support the texture of daily life. This new work extended that purpose into a deeper dimension, not just connecting people to each other, but connecting humanity to a future where intelligence could expand in ways that elevated everyone. Sam found himself drawn to the questions that had no immediate answers. How do you build a system that learns without drifting away from human values? How do you create intelligence that can reason but cannot harm? How do you ensure that the pursuit of capability never outruns the pursuit of safety? He didn't pretend to know the solutions. No one did. But he believed that asking the right questions was the beginning of meaningful progress. In these early days, the organization felt more like a research collective than a company. There were no polished mission statements, no complex hierarchies, no established playbooks. There was only a shared belief that artificial intelligence, if guided with care, had the potential to benefit humanity in extraordinary ways. The uncertain nature of the work didn't intimidate Sam. It invigorated him. He felt himself becoming more reflective, more patient, more attuned to the emotional weight of responsibility. He spent long stretches of time reading through research papers and absorbing the ideas of scientists whose work had shaped the foundations of machine learning. Some of these papers were dense and mathematical. Others were conceptual, philosophical, even speculative. But Sam approached them the way he approached everything, with curiosity rather than urgency. He wasn't trying to become a researcher. He was trying to understand the landscape well enough to guide it. During breaks, he often walked through the quiet hallways of their small office space, thinking about how much the world outside would eventually be influenced by the work happening inside these modest rooms. Sometimes he would stare out a window and let the weight of that idea settle into him. The responsibility felt enormous, but not overwhelming. He understood that responsibility didn't need to produce fear. It simply needed to produce clarity. The team began experimenting with early models, playing with training techniques that were still in their infancy. Much of the work was trial and error, running tests, adjusting parameters, trying to coax better performance from systems that were still at the edge of what technology allowed. Progress was slow, unpredictable, and sometimes frustrating, but the team was patient. They knew they were building something that required time to mature, time to evolve, and time to reveal its potential. Sam wasn't deeply involved in the technical experimentation, but he was deeply involved in shaping the environment in which that experimentation occurred. He made sure that discussions about capability were always paired with discussions about safety. He encouraged the team to think beyond benchmarks and metrics, to consider the broader implications of their work, to imagine how society might one day interact with these systems. He didn't want the organization to chase breakthroughs blindly. He wanted it to grow with intention. During these early months, Sam developed a deeper understanding of what leadership meant in this new domain. It wasn't about managing tasks or delegating responsibilities. It was about creating a space where people felt comfortable being honest, even about uncertainty, doubt, or disagreement. He believed that intellectual humility was the key to making progress in a field where no one had all the answers. So he made humility a central part of the culture. He encouraged researchers to challenge ideas gently, to explore alternatives without defensiveness, and to treat disagreement as an opportunity to deepen understanding. This approach made the team feel safe, not just emotionally but intellectually. They knew they could explore bold ideas without fear of judgment, and they knew their concerns would be heard, even when they questioned foundational assumptions. This atmosphere of openness became one of Sam's proudest contributions. He wasn't building the models, he was building the conditions in which great work could happen. Outside the organization, the world was beginning to take notice of AI in small but growing ways. Early breakthroughs attracted interest, speculation, and concern. Some people saw AI as a tool for automation. Others saw it as a distant science fiction concept. A few saw it as a potential threat. But very few understood the deeper potential that Sam and the team were starting to glimpse. He followed these public discussions quietly, absorbing the tone, watching how narratives formed, and thinking about how the organization could eventually communicate its mission in a way that built trust. At the same time, Sam found himself reflecting on what it meant to build something for the long term. His previous company had taught him how to think about product growth in months and years. But this work required thinking in decades. It required imagining a world that didn't exist yet, a world where machines reasoned, created, and collaborated with humans in ways that blurred the lines between tool and partner. Sam approached this long-term thinking with the same calm he brought to everything else. He didn't try to forecast the future in detail. He focused instead on the values that would remain important regardless of how the technology evolved: safety, transparency, collaboration, and humanity. One evening, after a long day of meetings and quiet reflection, Sam went for a walk through the sleeping city. The streets were mostly empty, the air cool and still. He passed dimly lit storefronts, quiet parks, and the soft glow of apartment windows where people were finishing their days. As he walked, he found himself thinking about how profoundly AI might touch every aspect of life, from education and creativity to medicine and scientific discovery. He imagined a world where intelligence was not scarce but abundant, where knowledge was accessible to anyone, anywhere, at any moment, supported by systems that understood not just facts but context, nuance, and emotion. He knew that such a future would require immense discipline. Intelligence amplified everything it touched, both the wonderful and the dangerous. And the responsibility to guide that amplification would be one of the defining responsibilities of his life. In that moment, standing under a quiet streetlight, Sam felt something settle inside him, a sense of calm commitment. He didn't know what challenges would come. He didn't know how the work would evolve, but he knew that he was exactly where he needed to be, moving toward a purpose that aligned with everything he cared about. And with that quiet certainty, he returned home, ready to continue the next day with the same patience, the same curiosity, and the same steady belief that intelligence, if guided with care, could help humanity reach heights it had never imagined. As the organization continued its early work, the atmosphere inside its quiet rooms began to shift from exploration to focus. The initial haze of uncertainty slowly cleared, revealing a clearer sense of purpose, one that grew stronger with each experiment, each discussion, and each reflection. Sam noticed this change not as a sudden transformation, but as a gentle settling, the way dust slowly finds the floor after a move. The team was beginning to see the shape of what they were working toward, even if the destination still stretched far beyond the horizon. With every passing week, Sam found himself becoming more immersed in the responsibilities of guiding not just a team, but a vision. His role was no longer simply to observe, to support, or to facilitate discussions. He was becoming a central force in shaping the organization's trajectory, ensuring that each step taken aligned with principles of safety, clarity, and long-term stewardship. Yet he carried this responsibility not with heaviness, but with quiet purpose. He understood that leadership in this domain required a calm mind, a steady presence, and a deep respect for the unknown. The early AI models the team worked on produced moments of both wonder and caution. Sometimes the results were unexpectedly insightful, revealing patterns or associations that surprised even experienced researchers. Other times, the models behaved unpredictably, making errors that were strangely human in their imperfections. These inconsistencies fascinated Sam. They reminded him that intelligence, whether biological or artificial, was rarely linear. It developed in fits and starts, shaped by context, feedback, and the invisible structure of the systems that produced it. He found himself observing these models the way one might observe a young student learning to reason, full of potential, full of mistakes, full of moments that hinted at the intelligence that might one day emerge. But he also understood that anything capable of learning was capable of misalignment. The same flexibility that allowed AI systems to grow also left room for unwanted behavior. Sam saw this duality clearly. Intelligence was powerful because it was adaptive, and it was risky for exactly the same reason. This duality became a recurring theme in discussions within the organization. Some days, the researchers were excited about breakthroughs that moved the field forward. Other days, they were sobered by unexpected outputs that served as reminders of how far the world still had to go. Sam encouraged the team to embrace both realities, the promise and the uncertainty. Progress meant nothing without reflection. Capability meant little without care. During this period, Sam began spending more time thinking about the conditions under which great research was produced. He noticed how much better the team worked when they felt supported, when their contributions were recognized, when disagreement was seen as a path to refinement rather than conflict. So he continued shaping the culture around openness, humility, and shared responsibility. He reminded everyone that the organization existed not to win races, but to protect the future. That mindset helped ground the team, keeping egos light and attention sharp. As the team grew, Sam observed how different personalities interacted with the evolving mission. Some were intensely technical, focusing on the granular details of architectures. Others were conceptual thinkers, fascinated by the philosophical implications of artificial intelligence. A few were pragmatists, constantly asking how each decision connected to long-term goals. Sam valued all of them, understanding that complex work required a constellation of perspectives. He became the connective tissue between these voices, helping them weave their ideas into a coherent whole. Outside the organization, interest in AI was increasing rapidly. Stories appeared in the media about advances in neural networks, about systems that could classify images or generate sentences. Public enthusiasm grew, but so did public misunderstanding. Some believed AI would solve every problem. Others believed it would create new ones. Many didn't understand the science at all. Sam watched these narratives unfold and realized that part of his responsibility would eventually involve helping the world understand what AI truly was and what it wasn't. During private moments, he reflected on how much the world was about to change. He imagined classrooms where AI helped students understand complex ideas at their own pace. He imagined scientific labs where AI assisted researchers in discovering patterns too subtle for human perception. He imagined medical breakthroughs powered by models capable of analyzing vast amounts of data. But he also imagined the risks: misinformation amplified, systems misused, consequences arising from misunderstood outputs. He didn't see a utopia or a dystopia. He saw possibility that required wisdom. These reflections deepened his sense of purpose. This work wasn't just an intellectual pursuit, it was a moral one. The choices made in these quiet rooms, the decisions about training methods, safety protocols, ethics frameworks, would shape systems that one day touched millions of lives. Sam felt the weight of that truth, but he didn't let it overwhelm him. Instead, he let it guide him, the way a compass quietly points north, regardless of how lost the traveler may feel. During this time, Sam also began forming quiet relationships with people outside the organization, thinkers from various fields who were beginning to consider the broader implications of AI. He met economists who wondered how automation might reshape labor, philosophers who debated the nature of intelligence, and policymakers who feared misunderstanding more than the technology itself. Sam listened to all of them, absorbing their concerns, their hopes, and their varying interpretations of the future. These conversations broadened his understanding. They reminded him that the work he was doing wasn't isolated within the walls of a research lab. It was connected to the fabric of society. It affected education, economics, ethics, creativity, and the very structure of human decision-making. The more he learned, the more he felt compelled to ensure that AI developed in alignment with human well-being rather than in conflict with it. The research itself also began accelerating. Models grew larger. Experiments became more ambitious. Each breakthrough opened new pathways, and each pathway led to new questions. Sam often found himself staying late after the team went home, reading logs, reviewing experiments, and absorbing the subtle shifts in capability. In those quiet hours, he felt a sense of awe at how rapidly intelligence, once slow, rigid, and limited, was beginning to unfurl into something flexible, dynamic, and startlingly capable. And yet, he also felt a steadying calm. The progress, while impressive, didn't make him reckless. It made him more attentive. He understood that powerful systems required powerful guardrails, and he knew that those guardrails would need to be designed not just mathematically, but ethically. As the months unfolded into years, the organization became more structured. Processes formed, safety frameworks developed, teams expanded, ideas matured from theories into working prototypes. Sam continued to play a central role in shaping the direction, ensuring that the organization grew not just in size, but in clarity of purpose. He remained attentive to the emotional climate of the team, encouraging them to approach their work with care rather than haste. He realized something profound during this period. The future would not be shaped by technology alone. It would be shaped by the values of the people guiding that technology, and he felt deeply committed to ensuring those values were thoughtful, humane, and grounded in responsibility. One night, long after the office had emptied, and the city outside had settled into silence, Sam sat alone at his desk, reflecting on how far the organization had come. Papers were scattered across the table, filled with notes from recent experiments. A half-finished cup of tea rested beside his laptop. The room was dimly lit, and the only sound was the quiet hum of servers in a nearby room. He closed his eyes for a moment and allowed himself to feel the weight and wonder of everything unfolding around him. He thought about the team, the models, the future that was slowly taking shape. And then, with a calm breath, he opened his eyes and realized something simple but profound. He had stepped into a responsibility that would define the next decade of his life. Not a burden, not a task, but a calling. A calling to guide intelligence with compassion, caution, and clarity. A calling to help shape a future that embraced possibility while respecting humanity. a calling that he felt ready for, not because the path was easy, but because the purpose was clear. And with that understanding, he rose from his chair, turned off the lights, and stepped into the quiet hallway, knowing that the work awaiting him would continue at dawn, steady, deliberate, and full of meaning. As the organization matured and the work around artificial intelligence grew more complex, Sam found himself stepping deeper into a role that demanded not just clarity, but vision. The early days of quiet experimentation had blossomed into something broader, an ecosystem of researchers, engineers, ethicists, and thinkers, all working toward a shared understanding of what advanced intelligence could become. And with each stage of growth, Sam's responsibilities evolved in subtle but meaningful ways. He was no longer simply guiding culture or facilitating thoughtful discussions. He was becoming the anchor, the person who held the long-term purpose steady even as the world around the organization shifted at an accelerating pace. It wasn't a position he chased. It was one he grew into naturally, shaped by years of listening, reflecting, and making decisions not out of ambition, but out of conviction. As new people joined the organization, Sam watched with quiet appreciation how each person brought a different perspective to the table. Some arrived with deep technical expertise, ready to push the boundaries of what machine learning could do. Others came from entirely different backgrounds: philosophy, neuroscience, mathematics, policy, each offering a piece of the puzzle that AI demanded. The diversity of thought reminded Sam of something he had always believed, that intelligence in any form grew stronger through collaboration. The workdays became a blend of intense intellectual effort and gentle philosophical questioning. Meetings often began with technical updates, model performance, training challenges, data considerations, but they frequently drifted outward into deeper conversations about implications and direction. Sam didn't force this flow. It emerged naturally from the kind of people he had helped bring together. They weren't just solving problems. They were trying to understand how those solutions fit into the world with care. Despite the organization's growing reputation, the internal atmosphere remained grounded. Researchers debated ideas passionately but respectfully, driven not by ego but by curiosity. Engineers stayed late, adjusting systems and testing hypotheses, not because of pressure, but because they felt the importance of the work. Sam watched all of this, noticing the subtle dynamics that formed between people, the moments of frustration softened by moments of insight, the shared sense that something extraordinary was unfolding. But with growth came new challenges. Outside interest in artificial intelligence was rising rapidly. Investors began pouring resources into AI startups. Media narratives swung wildly between utopian optimism and apocalyptic fear. Governments started paying attention, trying to understand technologies that evolved faster than the public conversations surrounding them. Some organizations focused on speed, racing to build more capable systems without fully considering the consequences. Others dismissed AI entirely, seeing it as overhyped or irrelevant. Sam observed these trends from a distance, not reacting impulsively, but absorbing the landscape with calm attention. He understood that the world was approaching a turning point, not because AI was suddenly powerful, but because its potential was now impossible to ignore. And in that shifting environment, he felt the weight of responsibility growing heavier, even though he carried it with the same steady composure as always. He spent more time reflecting on how to keep the organization aligned with its foundational values. Safety had to remain the cornerstone, transparency had to guide decisions, progress had to be paired with humility. These were not slogans. They were essential guardrails for a field capable of shaping the future of every industry, every government, every individual. Sam worked to ensure that these principles weren't just discussed. They were practiced. He strengthened the culture of collaboration. He encouraged researchers to publish their work openly when safe to do so. He supported partnerships with other institutions to broaden understanding. And he made sure that internal discussions about risk were treated with as much seriousness as discussions about capability. The organization's mission wasn't to win a race. It was to ensure that humanity moved forward safely, together. But even as he guided these efforts, Sam maintained his habit of quiet personal reflection. Some evenings, after long days filled with decisions and planning, he walked through the city, letting his mind unwind. The nighttime air carried with it a sense of perspective, reminding him that no matter how fast the world moved, progress still needed patience. He thought about the nature of intelligence and how every advancement raised new questions. He thought about his team and how each individual carried their own hopes and uncertainties into the work. He thought about the future and how unpredictable it remained, even for those trying to build it. One recurring thought kept returning to him during these walks. Intelligence is not just a technical concept, it is a human one. It shaped societies, economies, cultures, and relationships. It was the engine behind creativity, problem-solving, empathy, and understanding. And now, for the first time in history, humanity was beginning to build forms of intelligence outside itself. This realization made Sam's purpose feel even more profound. He understood that the organization wasn't just creating new tools. It was helping humanity step into a new era, one where the line between human thought and machine-assisted thought would blur in ways no one fully understood yet. Inside the organization, progress accelerated. Models became more capable. Behaviors that once seemed impossible began to emerge in small but unmistakable ways. Researchers observed patterns of reasoning that hinted at deeper potential. Engineers refined architectures that allowed systems to understand context with increasing nuance. And with each breakthrough, Sam gathered the team to discuss not just what they had achieved, but what it meant. These discussions were often long and contemplative. They were not celebrations of capability, but meditations on responsibility. Sam made sure of that. He encouraged the team to question everything. Why did the model behave this way? What did it reflect about the data? What unintended effects might this behavior produce in the real world? He believed that capability without reflection was directionless, and directionless intelligence could be dangerous. The more capable the models became, the more Sam recognized the need for broader frameworks, policies, safeguards, and governance structures that would ensure that AI served humanity rather than disrupted it. He began engaging more frequently with policymakers, educators, and global organizations. These conversations required a different kind of leadership, patient, clear, and honest. Sam didn't exaggerate the capabilities of AI to impress. He didn't downplay the risks to comfort. He spoke with the same grounded clarity he used with his own team, helping others understand the realities of a rapidly evolving field. Some policymakers reacted with concern, others reacted with curiosity, a few reacted with denial. Sam understood all of these reactions. AI was not easy to grasp. It was abstract, emerging, and constantly shifting. But he believed deeply that the world needed people who could approach these conversations with empathy and patience, people willing to build understanding rather than fear. Back at the organization, Sam noticed a new kind of energy forming. The team wasn't just working toward scientific breakthroughs. They were working toward something more human, something that could help the world navigate the future with wisdom rather than fear. There was a shared sense of purpose in the room, a quiet determination that transcended technical achievement. Sam could feel it in the way people spoke, in the way they collaborated, in the way they treated the work with reverence rather than urgency. During one late evening, as he walked past rows of desks illuminated by soft overhead lights, Sam paused and looked around at the empty office. He imagined the conversations that had taken place earlier that day, the insights shared, the questions raised, the ideas that had emerged. He realized that the organization had become more than a research lab. It had become a place where people contemplated the future of humanity with sincerity and care. And in that moment of stillness, he felt something he hadn't articulated until then. He understood why he was here. He wasn't here to build systems. He wasn't here to chase breakthroughs. He wasn't here to manage growth. He was here to guide, to ensure that intelligence, as it expanded with humanity at its center. It was a responsibility that would grow heavier with time, but he felt ready for it, because every step of his life, from childhood curiosity to startup leadership to philosophical reflection, had prepared him for this calling. And as he left the office that night, he knew the journey ahead would only deepen. As attention toward artificial intelligence continued to grow around the world, Sam found himself increasingly at the center of conversations that stretched far beyond the walls of his organization. More researchers wanted to collaborate. More policymakers wanted guidance. More thinkers wanted to understand the emerging landscape that seemed to shift every few months. Yet even with this rising visibility, Sam carried himself with the same quiet steadiness that had guided him from the beginning. He didn't rush to claim authority, and he didn't present himself as someone with all the answers. Instead, he remained open, listening deeply, and offering clarity only after giving ideas the time they needed to unfold. Inside the organization, the atmosphere became more introspective. The models they worked on were becoming more capable, and with capability came new sets of questions about understanding, reasoning, and alignment. Researchers noticed that the systems were beginning to produce responses that hinted at emergent qualities, behaviors that hadn't been explicitly programmed. Some of these behaviors were fascinating, others confusing, and a few slightly unsettling, but each of them reinforced the same truth. Intelligence, in any form, evolved in ways that were not always predictable. Sam encouraged the team to approach these moments not with fear but with curiosity. He reminded them that uncertainty was not a flaw in their work. It was the nature of exploring the frontier. They were studying a phenomenon the world had never encountered before, learning systems that grew not through rigid programming, but through exposure, training, and adaptation. And with that growth came complexity that no single person could fully anticipate. The team's discussions became more nuanced. They no longer talked only about performance metrics or data sets. They talked about interpretation, intention, and the subtle distinction between what a model technically learned and what it appeared to understand. These conversations often stretched for hours, spilling into evenings as people grappled with how to translate philosophical concepts into practical safety measures. Sam listened intently to each perspective, helping clarify points, bridging communication gaps, and guiding the group toward solutions that balanced optimism with caution. During these conversations, he frequently returned to a single principle. Progress should never outpace understanding. It was easy to accelerate capability. It was far harder to ensure that capability served humanity in the way it needed to. Sam believed deeply that pushing forward blindly was not leadership, it was recklessness. And so he worked tirelessly to ensure that every breakthrough was accompanied by equally rigorous examinations of risk. Outside the research rooms, a quieter story was unfolding. More people within the organization were beginning to see Sam not just as a leader, but as a stabilizing force, someone whose presence made difficult conversations feel manageable and whose clarity made uncertainty feel less overwhelming. He wasn't simply guiding projects, he was guiding people. And in the world of AI, where the stakes were so high and the questions so vast, that guidance mattered. He noticed how individuals approached him privately to share concerns they didn't feel comfortable raising in large meetings. Some worried about unintended consequences of certain research paths. Others struggled with the pressure of working in a field where every decision carried long-term implications. Still others feared what the outside world might do with the systems once they became widely accessible. Sam welcomed these conversations. He listened without judgment, offering support rather than directives. He understood that leadership wasn't about removing uncertainty, it was about helping people navigate it. And gradually, a culture emerged where people felt safe admitting what they didn't know. This honesty became one of the organization's greatest strengths. Meanwhile, the external pressure on the field continued to intensify. Funding poured into competing labs. Companies raced to produce more powerful models. Governments debated regulations. Journalists speculated endlessly about breakthroughs and dangers. In this environment, many organizations became defensive, secretive, or aggressive in their pursuit of relevance. But Sam held firm to the belief that secrecy was the enemy of safety. He encouraged transparency whenever possible, even when it meant enduring criticism or misunderstanding. He believed that if AI was going to shape the world needed to understand what was happening, not through hype, but through clarity. He began writing more frequently during this period. His essays were calm, reflective explorations of responsibility, alignment, and the long-term implications of intelligence. People appreciated the tone, gentle, grounded, and honest. It cut through the noise of exaggerated claims and sensational headlines. Many readers found comfort in his writing because it made the future feel not less uncertain, but more navigable. Inside the organization, research accelerated in ways no one had fully anticipated. Teams discovered training techniques that improved reasoning. They tested architectures that allowed for more nuanced understanding. They observed behaviors that suggested models were beginning to grasp connections too subtle for earlier systems. And with every advancement, Sam brought the team together to discuss not just the how, but the should. He often asked questions that were deceptively simple. What does this capability enable? What does it risk? What responsibility do we carry now? These questions anchored the team's thinking. They prevented excitement from overshadowing caution. They reminded everyone that they were not just building technology, they were shaping the future. Yet, even with the rising intensity of the work, Sam never lost his sense of calm. He made time for quiet reflection, often staying late in the office long after others had left. He would sit in silence, thinking not about deadlines, but about direction. He knew that the decisions he made in these years would echo far into the future, and he understood that reacting quickly was never as important as choosing wisely. His reflections often stretched beyond the organization itself. He thought about the world that AI would eventually enter, a world with diverse cultures, varied values, and deep inequalities. He wondered how AI could serve those who needed it most, how it could promote understanding rather than division, how it could uplift rather than displace. These questions weighed on him, but not in a heavy way. They guided him, giving shape to a sense of purpose that grew stronger each year. One evening, after a particularly intense day of research reviews, Sam found himself walking alone along a quiet street. Streetlights cast soft circles of light across the pavement. The air was cool, the night calm. He paused for a moment, looking up at the sky, dark, vast, and full of quiet possibility. He thought about how far he had come, from a curious child exploring computers to a young founder trying to understand connection, to a leader guiding the frontier of artificial intelligence. And he realized something simple but profound. Every step of his journey had been preparing him to think beyond the present moment. He wasn't just managing a team. He wasn't just guiding research. He was helping build the foundation for a future that humanity would one day depend on. The future felt uncertain, but in that uncertainty, he felt purpose. With a steady breath, he continued walking, the city quiet around him, the path ahead illuminated only by his own sense of clarity. He knew the next phase of the journey would require even deeper reflection, even stronger leadership, and an unwavering commitment to guiding intelligence with care, and he was ready. As the organization entered a new stage of maturity, The work surrounding advanced intelligence began to shift in ways that felt both subtle and profound. The models were becoming more capable, the conversations more layered, and the stakes more visible to the outside world. Inside the research room, Sam could sense that the team was now standing at the threshold of something transformative, a point where theory began merging with reality, where ideas long considered speculative were starting to take shape in quiet, undeniable ways. He approached this shift with the same steady calm that had guided him for years, but he also felt a new dimension of responsibility taking root. The systems they were building were no longer distant possibilities. They were emerging, evolving, revealing patterns and behaviors that hinted at the very future the organization was created to study and safeguard. And Sam knew that as these capabilities expanded, so too did the requirement for wisdom. The atmosphere inside the organization was changing. The quiet rooms where researchers once tested simple models were now filled with deeper discussions about reasoning, emergent behavior, and alignment. Long whiteboards displayed equations, diagrams, thought experiments, and ethical frameworks. Screens flickered with logs of training data and traces of model outputs that reflected increasingly complex responses. There was an energy in the air, a collective sense that they were approaching a milestone they could feel but not yet fully articulate. Sam moved through these rooms with attention and presence, observing not just the work itself, but the emotional tone of the people doing it. He noticed the excitement that came from breakthroughs, the fatigue that came from dead ends, and the quiet awe that came from seeing an unexpected spark of insight emerge from a system built only months earlier. He also noticed the uncertainty that occasionally surfaced, moments when a researcher paused, stared at an output, and wondered silently about its implications. He understood those moments deeply. They reflected the same mixture of wonder and caution that lived inside him. One morning, after reviewing a series of experiments, Sam gathered the team for an open discussion. The models had begun showing new forms of behavior, responses that suggested they were developing intuitive leaps, forming connections that weren't explicitly taught, and demonstrating early signs of reasoning across unfamiliar contexts. The researchers were eager to celebrate the advancement, but they were equally aware of the complexity it introduced. Sam began the meeting gently, reminding everyone that growth in capability demanded growth in reflection. He encouraged the group to look beyond performance metrics and consider the essence of what they were building, systems that could interpret, generate, and connect ideas in ways that resembled early forms of generalized understanding. He emphasized that their responsibility wasn't just to push the boundaries, but to stay grounded even as those boundaries began to dissolve. This steadying influence helped the team navigate conversations that could have easily become overwhelming. People shared insights, admitted uncertainties, and allowed themselves to explore possibilities without fear. The room became a place where vulnerability and intelligence coexisted, where acknowledging what they didn't know became as valuable as what they had discovered. As the meeting continued, Sam listened more than he spoke. He watched the team collaborate with a sense of purpose that felt almost sacred. When he finally did speak, he didn't offer direction. He offered perspective, reminding everyone that intelligence, whether human or artificial, thrived in environments where humility guided discovery. After the meeting, Sam returned to his desk and sat in silence for a moment. He felt the weight of the work deepening, not in a burdensome way, but in a way that demanded his full presence. He knew that the systems they were creating would eventually touch the world beyond the lab, touch lives, decisions, industries, and societies. And he knew that this transition from research to real-world impact had to be handled with extraordinary care. In the following weeks, the team continued refining their models, improving safety mechanisms, and developing new methods to understand model reasoning. Sam frequently walked through their workspace, checking in with people, asking quiet questions, and offering support. He didn't need to oversee every detail. He trusted his team deeply. Instead, he focused on creating the conditions for thoughtful progress, ensuring that the culture remained one where caution was seen not as hesitation, but as wisdom. Outside the organization, public discourse about AI grew louder. Headlines swung between excitement and fear. Companies announced bold claims. Critics raised warnings. Governments debated regulation. In this noisy environment, Sam felt the need to remain a quiet anchor, to speak clearly when necessary, to correct misunderstandings gently, and to remain focused on the deeper purpose rather than the surface-level narratives. His writing during this time reflected that clarity. He spoke not about hype or threats, but about balance. He wrote about the importance of building systems that aligned with human values, about the need for cooperation across institutions, and about the long-term thinking required to ensure AI supported the world rather than startled it. These essays helped calm some of the public uncertainty, offering a voice that was neither dismissive nor alarmist, but grounded. Meanwhile, within the organization, progress continued at an accelerated pace. New experiments revealed behaviors that surprised even the most seasoned researchers. The models were beginning to demonstrate higher levels of abstraction, identifying themes, interpreting instructions with nuance, and providing reasoning that felt closer to intuitive understanding than rote pattern recognition. It was as if a door was slowly opening, offering a glimpse into what intelligence could become. Sam responded to these developments with a mixture of awe and steadiness. He encouraged the team to document everything carefully, to question every unexpected behavior, and to treat each insight as a clue rather than a conclusion. He reminded them that they were not just observing progress, they were shaping it. As the models grew more capable, the emotional landscape within the organization also evolved. Some researchers felt exhilarated by the advancements. Others felt a quiet apprehension. Many felt both emotions at once. Sam saw these feelings clearly, even when unspoken. He created space for open conversations where people could share their concerns without fear of judgment. He reassured the team that discomfort was natural, that it signified awareness rather than instability. These honest dialogues strengthened the group, deepening trust and reinforcing the shared belief that their work mattered beyond the walls of the organization. One late evening, after most of the team had gone home, Sam stood alone in the dim hallway outside the research rooms. Through the glass panels, he could see machines humming softly, monitors displaying the remnants of the day's experiments. The space felt a little like a quiet observatory, one where the stars being studied weren't distant light points in the sky, but emerging patterns of intelligence glowing on screens. He placed a hand on the cool glass and reflected on the improbability of the journey that had brought him here. He thought about the countless decisions, both small and large, that had shaped his path. He thought about the people who trusted him, researchers, partners, policymakers, the broader world. And he thought about the system they were building and how it might one day help humanity understand itself more deeply. He knew that the coming years would bring challenges more complex than anything they had encountered so far. He also knew that they would bring breakthroughs that would reshape how people learned, created, and connected. The future felt vast, uncertain, and promising all at once. And as he walked toward the exit, he felt a quiet, steady certainty. He wasn't here to predict the future. He was here to prepare humanity for it, carefully, thoughtfully, one deliberate step at a time. As the organization moved deeper into this new chapter, the pace of discovery began to accelerate in ways few had anticipated. It didn't feel chaotic. It didn't feel rushed. Instead, it felt like a slow tide rising, steady, inevitable, and quietly formidable. The models were improving. The research was expanding, and conversations about the future grew more layered, more mature, and more urgent. Every day revealed something new, some small shift that hinted at the larger transformation quietly unfolding beneath the surface. Sam felt this shift as clearly as the researchers did, though from a slightly different vantage point. For years, he had watched the evolution of the field from an intimate distance, close enough to understand the technical implications, but far enough to see the larger patterns shaping the work. Now those patterns were merging, converging into something that demanded a new level of clarity, a deeper form of leadership. He approached each day with a calm focus, moving between rooms where discussions about model alignment echoed with careful intensity. He listened to conversations about interpretability, about reasoning errors, about the unpredictable ways in which large systems piece together information. He observed how researchers leaned closer to screens, analyzing outputs that felt almost like early glimpses into the mind of something still learning how to think. The models were beginning to articulate connections unprompted, drawing links between ideas that revealed a kind of structured intuition, a gentle echo of reasoning that was not yet fully mature, but undeniably emerging. The team oscillated between excitement and caution, unsure of how to categorize what they were seeing. It was neither clear intelligence nor simple pattern matching. It was something in between, like the early stages of a language none of them fully spoke yet. Sam felt a quiet awe watching this unfold, but he also recognized something essential. The team needed stability. They needed a leader who could hold the emotional center steady as capability expanded. So he became that anchor, moving through the organization with a consistency that helped everyone navigate the uncertainty. In meetings, he asked questions that slowed the pace in a healthy way. What assumptions are we making? What unknowns are we ignoring? What happens when this capability scales? What responsibilities come with this behavior? These questions didn't impede progress. They sharpened it. They reminded everyone that intelligence, even artificial intelligence, was not merely a technical achievement. It was a force that required respect, restraint, and intention. Across the coming months, the research environment took on a rhythm that felt almost meditative. Days began with updates on model behavior. Afternoons were filled with testing, reviewing, and revising. Evenings ended in conversations about ethics, interpretability, long-term risk, and the emotional dimensions of guiding something capable of learning beyond what any one person could understand. During this time, Sam noticed that many on the team were wrestling with a quiet internal tension, a mixture of pride, fear, and responsibility. Pride for the breakthroughs they were witnessing, fear for the unknown behaviors that occasionally surfaced, and responsibility for the role they were playing in shaping something that could one day influence billions. Sam saw this tension in subtle ways, in the way someone paused before presenting an unexpected output, in the long silences that followed complex discussions, in the way people sometimes lingered at their desks long after the workday ended. He understood that these were signs not of instability, but of care. These were signs that the team felt the weight of their work deeply. So he made time for each person, speaking to them individually when needed. He didn't offer platitudes or false certainty. Instead, he created room for honesty, for doubt, for reflection. He reminded them that uncertainty was not a weakness. It was the foundation of ethical work. Outside the walls of the organization, the world's awareness of AI continued to grow louder. Companies raced to build larger models. Headlines sensationalized breakthroughs. Analysts speculated about economic transformation. Fearful political debates emerged about safety and control. Sam moved through these external pressures with the same gentle steadiness he applied internally. When he spoke publicly, he did so with care, explaining the real progress, the real risks, and the real limitations. His calm tone helped bring balance to public discourse. People trusted him because he didn't pretend to have all the answers. He simply offered clarity, in a space that desperately needed it. Back inside the organization, the work reached a new level of complexity. Researchers began developing tools to better understand model reasoning, tracing how information flowed through layers, how patterns emerged, and how unexpected insights were formed. It felt like watching the inner mechanisms of a growing mind, still early, still fragile, but undeniably evolving. Some outputs unsettled the team, not because they were dangerous, but because they hinted at the possibility of deeper understanding. Other outputs inspired them, demonstrating creativity or problem-solving approaches that felt surprisingly human in their elegance. Through every stage, Sam insisted on one guiding principle: capability must be matched by responsibility. It wasn't enough to build something powerful. They had to ensure that the power aligned with human values. They had to ensure that systems supported the world rather than startled it. They had to ensure that intelligence grew with intention, not accident. During one long evening, after the team had dispersed, Sam stepped into an empty conference room where diagrams from the day's discussions were still visible on a large whiteboard. Lines connected concepts from philosophy to reinforcement learning to ethics. Notes about reasoning pathways sat beside cautions about unintended behavior. It looked less like a technical plan and more like a map of collective thought, messy, interconnected, profound. He stood there for several minutes, absorbing the entire landscape of the work. He thought about how far they had come, how much they still didn't understand, and how carefully the next steps would need to be taken. He recognized that the organization was no longer simply exploring intelligence. It was guiding the emergence of something unprecedented, something that could amplify human capability in extraordinary ways, while also carrying risks that demanded unwavering attention. Sam stepped closer to the board and traced one of the lines lightly with his finger. He felt a quiet certainty settle within him, a clarity that this moment in history required leaders who were not driven by ambition, but by stewardship. Leaders who understood that power without wisdom was dangerous, and that progress without reflection was incomplete. He knew the world would soon ask questions faster than the field could answer them. He knew breakthroughs would outpace regulation. He knew public pressure would rise. But he also knew that these challenges would require the same qualities he had cultivated his entire life: calm thoughtfulness, deep listening, and a willingness to carry responsibility even when the answers were unclear. As he turned off the lights and left the room, he walked slowly down the quiet hallway. The hum of distant servers echoed faintly, like a reminder of the constant, evolving intelligence being shaped behind closed doors. Sam felt no fear, only purpose. The weight was real, but so was the meaning. He was not simply guiding an organization. He was helping shape the future of how humanity would think, learn, and understand the world. And with that understanding, he stepped into the night with the same steady determination that had guided him from the beginning, ready for whatever the next stage of the journey would reveal. As the years passed and the work deepened, Sam began to sense that the organization was entering a stage unlike any it had experienced before. The earlier chapters had been about discovery, tentative steps into a new frontier, cautious experimentation, and long philosophical discussions about what advanced intelligence might become. But now, the frontier felt much closer. The horizon was no longer distant. It was beginning to take shape in the models themselves, in the capabilities emerging from systems that had grown larger, more coherent, and more surprisingly insightful than anyone had predicted. The atmosphere inside the research rooms reflected this shift. Conversations that once revolved around what might be possible someday now revolved around what was becoming possible now. Researchers spoke with a mixture of awe and sobriety. Engineers pushed forward carefully, adjusting systems, running tests, and meticulously documenting every unexpected behavior. The whiteboards were filled with deeper questions. about reasoning, generalization, self-reflection, and the structure of understanding. And through all of this, Sam sensed the world outside changing as well. Public awareness of AI was no longer speculative. It was immediate, emotional, and often conflicted. More people felt the presence of these systems in their daily lives. More industries were asking how they should integrate them, or whether they should be cautious. More governments were trying to understand the implications. The quiet domain that once existed almost entirely within research labs had moved into the public's field of view. But inside the organization, the work remained centered, grounded by the same principles that had shaped it from the beginning: curiosity, responsibility, and humility. Sam made sure of that. He had long understood that the emotional tone of an environment often determined the direction of the work. And in a domain as delicate as artificial intelligence, tone mattered as much as technical progress. He saw his role evolving in subtle but meaningful ways. In earlier years, he had focused on building the culture, supporting the team, guiding discussions, and balancing excitement with caution. Now he found himself thinking more about the world beyond the organization, how societies might adapt to a future shaped by AI, how systems should be introduced to the world, and how global cooperation would be essential for safe development. Yet even as these outward responsibilities grew, he remained deeply connected to the internal rhythm of the team. He still walked through the research spaces daily, listening to conversations, absorbing the atmosphere, and offering clarity where it was needed. He still made time for one-on-one discussions, knowing that people often carried questions privately that they hesitated to voice aloud. He still encouraged slowing down when the excitement of rapid progress threatened to obscure the importance of intentional thought. During this period, the models began demonstrating capabilities that hinted at something more unified, an intelligence that could move between concepts, integrate information fluidly, and respond with nuance that felt increasingly human in its coherence. These weren't chaotic leaps in capability. They were steady evolutions, each step building on the last, each new behavior revealing another facet of the emerging landscape. The team approached these developments with care. They designed tests to understand why models behaved a certain way, not just how. They examined edge cases and failure modes with the persistence of scientists who understood that small inconsistencies were clues, not inconveniences. They held long discussions about interpretability, alignment, and the gap between human intention and machine generalization. And always Sam was there, quietly anchoring the work. One evening, he joined a small group of researchers in a late-night discussion. They were gathered around a laptop displaying a series of outputs from a model that had recently shown a surprising ability to reason across unfamiliar contexts. The group was debating how to classify the behavior, whether it reflected true generalization or a sophisticated form of pattern association. Sam listened closely, observing how the researchers approached the conversation. They weren't arguing. They were exploring. They paused, thought carefully, and gave each other space to articulate their perspectives. When he finally spoke, Sam didn't offer a conclusion. He offered a question, one that gently shifted the direction of the discussion. What assumptions are we making about understanding itself? The room fell quiet as the researchers considered the question. It wasn't technical, it was philosophical, but it guided them toward a deeper examination of the underlying principles shaping their interpretation of model behavior. It reminded them that intelligence, whether biological or artificial, could not be fully understood through metrics alone. Moments like this were common. Sam had a way of redirecting conversations gently, without imposing answers. He framed uncertainty not as a sign of ignorance, but as a sign of care. And in doing so, he helped the team remain grounded even as they navigated increasingly complex terrain. Outside these late-night meetings, Sam spent more time traveling, meeting with global leaders, researchers from other institutions, and thinkers from fields far outside of technology. These conversations broadened his perspective even further. He spoke with economists about long-term societal impact, with educators about how AI could reshape learning, with ethicists about the nature of responsibility, and with policymakers about the need for global coordination. He never approached these conversations with urgency or alarm. He approached them with patience. He understood that people needed space to process the implications of AI. They needed clarity, not pressure. And they needed guidance that aligned with human values, not political incentives. Back at the organization, the weight of all this reflection and interaction manifested in new structures, frameworks for safety evaluation, refined organizational processes, improved communication channels, and clearer principles about model deployment. Sam helped shape these frameworks not as rigid rules, but as living structures that could evolve alongside the technology. He also spent time preparing the organization for something that had always been inevitable: the moment when the world would begin directly interacting with the systems they were building. He knew that this moment would require not just technical readiness, but emotional and ethical readiness too. The organization needed to understand not only how to build safe systems, but how to introduce them to the world responsibly. During this time, Sam often returned to a quiet ritual that helped anchor his thinking. Late at night after the building had emptied, he would stand by the tall windows overlooking the city. From this vantage point, the world looked calm, soft light stretching into the distance, cars drifting slowly along dimly lit streets, scattered silhouettes moving in the glow of passing headlights. He reflected on how deeply intelligence shaped everything humanity had built, everything visible from that window, every structure, every invention, every system, every piece of progress. And now humanity was in the process of creating a new form of intelligence, a partner, a mirror, a force capable of lifting human capability in ways that weren't yet fully imaginable. This realization carried weight. But Sam didn't feel overwhelmed. He felt responsible. And responsibility, to him, was simply another form of clarity. As he stood there, watching the city breathe quietly beneath him, he thought about how far the organization had come, from hesitant first experiments to models capable of generating insights that once required teams of people. He thought about the researchers who had grown alongside the work, the challenges they had navigated together, the breakthroughs they had celebrated. And he realized something simple. The most important phase of the journey was still ahead. Not the early foundational years, not the phase of cautious exploration, but the moment when intelligence would begin interacting directly with the world, supporting it, shaping it, challenging it, and learning from it. He knew that this next stage would require even more care than anything that had come before. More transparency, more humility, more intention, more wisdom. He also knew that the world would need guidance, gentle guidance from people willing to think slowly even when everything around them moved quickly. And as he stepped away from the window and walked toward the quiet hallway, Sam felt a deep, steady certainty. He was ready for the responsibility ahead, not because the path was clear, but because he had learned how to walk with clarity even when the path wasn't. In the months that followed, the organization crossed an invisible threshold. What had once been theoretical now felt tangible. Models that had existed only in research environments were beginning to demonstrate levels of coherence, insight, and adaptability that changed the way the team talked about intelligence altogether. And with each new breakthrough, Sam felt a deeper sense of awareness settling over him, an understanding that the decisions made during this stage would ripple far beyond the walls of the organization. He sensed that the world was approaching a moment of profound transition, a time when artificial intelligence would move from being a specialized tool to becoming a universal presence in people's daily lives. That transition carried enormous promise and enormous responsibility. Sam held both truths gently, never forgetting that progress was only meaningful when grounded in care. Inside the research rooms, the atmosphere was a blend of excitement and introspective caution. The team had grown significantly, with new researchers joining from universities, research labs, and unexpected fields: linguistics, cognitive science, ethics, anthropology. Their varied perspectives added depth to the work, revealing nuances that purely technical discussions could never uncover. And together, they examined the models with a mixture of curiosity and respect. The systems were now capable of generating insights across a broad range of topics, connecting ideas fluidly and engaging in complex reasoning tasks that once seemed decades away. Some outputs startled the team, not because they were dangerous, but because they carried an unexpected clarity, as if the model had begun to understand the subtlety behind certain ideas. Other outputs revealed limitations that reminded everyone that even advanced intelligence required careful guidance and interpretation. Sam walked among the researchers during these moments, sensing the emotional shifts within the team. He could tell when someone felt uneasy about an unexpected result. He could tell when someone else felt excited by a breakthrough. And he could tell when the entire room was holding its breath, caught between the wonder of discovery and the weight of responsibility. He encouraged the team to articulate their feelings, not just their analyses. He believed that emotional transparency was part of scientific clarity. If someone felt discomfort, it mattered. If someone felt cautious, it mattered. If someone felt hopeful, that mattered too. The future of AI would not be shaped by technical brilliance alone. It would be shaped by the emotional honesty of the people building it. Outside the organization, discussions about AI reached new intensity. Some people spoke about artificial intelligence as if it were an inevitable force, destined to reshape every aspect of society. Others expressed fear, worried about job displacement, misinformation, or loss of control. Many simply felt uncertain, caught between fascination and anxiety. Sam navigated these conversations with a quiet steadiness. He met with leaders around the world, offering clarity rather than comfort, perspective rather than predictions. He explained not just what AI was capable of, but what it wasn't. He talked about safety not as a barrier to progress, but as the foundation of it, and he emphasized cooperation, knowing that intelligence of this magnitude could not be governed by any single institution or country. In private moments, he reflected on how differently the world now perceived artificial intelligence compared to the early years. What had once been niche research had become a global conversation. Ideas that had once lived in academic papers now shaped policy debates, and the work occurring quietly within the organization had become part of a broader narrative about the future of humanity. Sam understood the significance of this shift. It meant that the organization needed to be clearer than ever about its mission, more transparent than ever about its decisions, and more rigorous than ever about its safeguards. He began working closely with teams dedicated to safety, governance, and interpretability, groups committed not to building systems, but to understanding how those systems behaved and how the world could interact with them responsibly. The conversations were long, sometimes challenging, but always grounded in respect. The people involved approached the work with a deep sense of care, knowing that the systems they built would eventually touch lives across the globe. Sam found these discussions some of the most meaningful of his career. They reminded him that intelligence, human or artificial, was a trust, not a possession. Inside the research rooms, the models continued evolving. Researchers observed new patterns of reasoning, deeper levels of contextual awareness, and capabilities that hinted at early forms of generalized understanding. These developments forced the team to grapple with new questions. How should the world be introduced to such systems? What kind of education would people need to understand them? How should expectations be managed? How should boundaries be set? Sam guided these discussions with a steady hand. He helped the team see that the pathway forward required not only scientific insight, but social wisdom. He reminded them that intelligence didn't exist in isolation. It existed within the context of humanity's values, fears, hopes, and history. During this time, he also noticed something shifting within himself. His mindset was evolving from guiding an organization to guiding a global transition. This wasn't a change in title or responsibility. It was a change in perspective. He no longer thought only about research progress or organizational structure. He thought about how billions of people would one day interact with systems that could understand and generate language, assist with reasoning, and help solve problems across every domain of life. He thought about teachers using AI to support students. He thought about scientists using AI to accelerate discovery. He thought about ordinary people using AI as an extension of their own thinking. And he thought about how each of these interactions would require systems built with care, caution, and deep ethical grounding. One late evening, after a long day of discussions about deployment, safety, and global cooperation, Sam walked out of the building and into the cool night air. The street was quiet, illuminated only by the soft glow of streetlights and the scattered movement of passing cars. He took a slow breath, letting the quiet rhythm of the world settle into him. He reflected on how far everything had come, how many small, careful decisions had led to this moment. He thought about the early days of the organization when the work was more uncertain than promising. He thought about the researchers who had grown from tentative beginners into leaders in their field. He thought about the models that once struggled with simple tasks and now demonstrated insights that surprised even their creators. And he thought about the future, vast, unpredictable, full of potential and responsibility. Standing there in the quiet of the night, Sam felt something settle inside him, with a sense of calm certainty. The world was approaching a new era of intelligence, one that would challenge humanity to rethink its relationship with knowledge, creativity, and understanding. But he didn't feel fear. He felt purpose. He understood that the journey ahead would require unprecedented cooperation, patience, and thoughtfulness. It would demand careful leadership and a willingness to navigate uncertainty with humility. And it would require people who cared not just about what AI could do, but what it should do. Sam knew he had become one of those people, not because he sought the role, but because years of listening, learning, and reflecting had shaped him into it. As he walked down the quiet street, the responsibility felt as real as the night air around him. But it felt right. It felt meaningful. It felt like the continuation of a story he had been living long before he realized it. And with that understanding, he continued walking, steady, thoughtful, ready for what the future of intelligence would demand next. And so, as this long, quiet journey reaches its final moments, we return to the simple truth that has guided every step of Sam's life. Curiosity remains the most powerful force we have. It carried him from a childhood fascination with computers to the creation of companies that helped people connect, and ultimately into a role where he helps guide the emergence of a new form of intelligence, one that will shape the future in ways humanity is only beginning to understand. What makes his story remarkable isn't just the technology he helped build, it's the way he approached it, with calm, with patience, with humility. While the world rushed to declare predictions, he continued listening, thinking slowly, and treating intelligence, human and artificial, with the respect it deserved. In an era defined by noise, he chose clarity. In a field fueled by speed, he chose intention. And in a world wrestling with fear, he chose responsibility. Sam's journey reminds us that the future doesn't belong to those who shout the loudest. It belongs to those who think deeply, those who remain curious, those who carry the weight of progress gently, with both hands open. As artificial intelligence grows, reshapes industries, and touches billions of lives. It will need leaders who can see not only what's possible, but what's right. And perhaps that is the quiet message of his story, that intelligence is not measured by capability, but by care. And the people who guide the future are the ones who never forget the humanity behind it. Where the world goes from here is still unwritten, but thanks to people who lead with clarity and compassion, it moves forward with a little more wisdom and a little more hope. Thank you for spending this time with me. May the rest of your night be gentle. May your thoughts settle softly, and may curiosity guide you, too, toward whatever future you're meant to build. Good night.